From Dexter strapped to Brian's table with plastic at his throat, to Leela striking a match as the cabin fills with gasoline fumes, to Trinity stepping calmly over the threshold of Dexter's suburban home, to Oliver Saxon lowering a camera over a bleeding Deb in that hospital room. These are the moments where the predator flinches. These are the moments where Dexter Morgan becomes prey. Let's kick things off by admitting something the show itself loves to hide behind inner monologue and meticulous ritual. For a character sold as the ultimate hunter, a man of perfect control with a flawless plan for every kill room, Dexter spends the series getting outplayed, outmaneuvered, and emotionally cornered by the very monsters he stalks. His life is not a clean series of surgical eliminations. It is a long, messy investigation into how close he comes to losing everything that keeps his darkness contained. In this video, we're going to flip the usual framing. The focus is not just on how Dexter catches killers, but on how close they come to breaking him, converting him, or burning down the fragile structures that make the code even remotely functional. How many times does he almost join a killer instead of stopping one? How many times does a villain walk straight through his cover identity, into his home, into his family, before he even realizes the plan has already failed? To keep this clear, we're not cataloging every antagonist or every foil. We're tracking the ones who almost win, the ones who get dangerously close in 3 dimensions at once, strategically, by outthinking his procedures, emotionally, by exploiting his attachments, and existentially, by threatening his sense of who and what he is. Each major section will dig into a different season's primary threat and ask a simple question with terrifying implications. If this villain had been lucky by 5 minutes, would Dexter's entire trajectory have collapsed right there? Along the way, we'll see a pattern the show quietly admits but rarely names. Every time Dexter barely escapes, he loses something. A piece of innocence with Brian. A crucial ally with Dokes, stability with Rita, professional credibility with LaGuerta. By the time we reach Saxon filming Deb's broken body, these near defeats have piled up into a cumulative, crushing weight. Survival is no longer victory, it's damage control. So we'll move season by season, villain by villain, watching them get closer and closer to Dexter's core. First his code, then his cover, then his family, and finally his very sense of self. The central question isn't whether Dexter is clever enough to stay ahead, but how much of himself he has to sacrifice each time he falls behind. And the first, most important person to almost win? He isn't just a villain at all. He's Dexter's own brother, Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, who offers Dexter the one thing Harry's code never did: total, unconditional acceptance of the monster. So before we dive into Brian and the rest, we need to define the game they're actually playing. What does it mean to almost win against Dexter Morgan? Because if we reduce it to whoever nearly stabbed him first, we miss the real story. This is a series about attacks on his illusion of control, not just his pulse. To keep this clear, we're going to treat victory over Dexter as having 3 main paths. First, physical checkmate, killing him outright, capturing him, or putting him in a position where escape would require a miracle rather than a plan. Second, psychological conversion, not just scaring him, but actively reshaping his code and his self-image, turning him into something even worse than what he already is. Third, social collapse, detonating the fragile ecosystem that lets a serial killer pass as a loving brother, coworker, and father. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to 3 pillars his power rests on: Harry's code, the rules that tell him who is allowed to die and how clean the investigation has to look; the mask, his role as a blood spatter analyst, an awkward but harmless normal guy; And the support system around that mask, Deb, Rita, his colleagues, even people like Vogel later on, who unconsciously keep his trajectory pointed away from immediate exposure. Any villain who meaningfully threatens even one of those pillars is dangerous. But the focus is not just on single cracks. The ones who almost win go after two, sometimes all three, at the same time. Brian doesn't only stalk Dexter's body, he stalks his identity, offering a life where Harry's code is a lie and brotherhood is built on blood. Leela doesn't just tempt him sexually, she burns his apartment, kills Dokes, and nearly kills Rita and the kids, turning his support system and cover into collateral damage. Miguel doesn't simply learn the code, he rewrites it, treating it as a political weapon, an open license that could scale Dexter's private pathology into a public killing machine. Then we have Trinity, who walks straight through Dexter's suburban fantasy. Arthur Mitchell studies Dexter's mask, senses the cracks, and still manages to reach Rita, proving that the family life Dexter thought would contain the monster is exactly where the collapse happens. And later, Saxon turns the threat forward in time. He goes after legacy and exposure, filming kills, targeting Vogel, and forcing Dexter to confront what happens when his methods and his son's future intersect on camera. How do you compartmentalize a crime scene your child might one day Google? The central question, every season, isn't just will Dexter get caught, it's which blind spot will get exploited this time. His biggest weakness is not his skill set, it's his conviction that the code is airtight, that every contingency is covered, that he can run parallel lives forever without consequences bleeding across the lines. Each major section will track 3 beats for every major villain, the moment they gain the upper hand, the specific blind spot they weaponize, and the exact decision Dexter makes that barely pulls him back from the brink. Along the way, we'll see that the closest calls are not always where the knives are. Sometimes, they're where the offers are. And with the rules of the game in place, let's kick things off with the most intimate threat of all, the ice truck killer, Brian Moser, the man who doesn't just know Dexter's darkness, but shares it down to the blood. Season 1 opens with Dexter at his most confident. Neat kill rooms. Perfect plastic. Blood slides lined up like trophies of control. He believes Harry's code has turned him into an untouchable predator, a precision instrument operating above the messy realm of feelings. He has a girlfriend he doesn't desire, colleagues he doesn't truly know, and a story he repeats to himself. He cannot love, he cannot connect, and that makes him safe. Then the bodies start talking back. The ice truck killer doesn't just dump corpses. He drains them, cleans them, poses them. Limbs arranged in deliberate patterns, skin pale against neon backdrops, a decapitated head left on a neatly wrapped present. These aren't random signatures. They read like letters addressed to one person. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the murders, but on how the murders feel like messages specifically engineered for Dexter's psychology. From early on, Brian is dictating the tempo. He leaves a dismembered body at a crime scene that mirrors Dexter's own ritualistic precision. He paints the fingertips of a victim, echoing Dexter's forensic obsession with trace evidence. Dexter, who usually stalks and selects on his own schedule, suddenly finds himself chasing someone else's pattern. He's reacting. He's investigating his own reflection. That shift hides Brian's first major advantage: information asymmetry. Brian knows exactly who Dexter is. He remembers the shipping container. He remembers the blood. He knows that Harry took one son and abandoned the other, and he understands how a code was built over that trauma. Dexter, meanwhile, doesn't even know he has a brother, let alone that this brother is studying him like a lab specimen. Every crime scene becomes a psychological probe. The Barbie doll left in Dexter's freezer, dismembered piece by piece. The blood patterns that appear and disappear, taunting his supposed detachment. The escalation from distant tableau to scenes that invade Dexter's personal orbit. Each move tests a boundary. Will Dexter feel curiosity? Will he feel excitement? Will he feel anything at all? And when he does, isn't that already a crack in the story he tells himself about being empty? Brian avoids the usual mistakes of Dexter's prey because, fundamentally, he isn't prey. He doesn't rush. He doesn't get sloppy. He never underestimates Dexter's intelligence because he shares it, mirrors it, and then twists it. While other killers scramble to hide from the Bay Harbor butcher to be, Brian walks calmly toward him. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that idea. From the pilot onward, Brian is quietly winning a game Dexter doesn't even know he's playing. He isn't trying to evade Dexter's investigation. He's trying to earn an invitation. Every clue is a lure. Every body is an argument. And that's where the real danger lives. The central question with Brian is not, will he kill Dexter? It's much worse. Will he offer Dexter something so seductive, a shared past, a shared hunger, a life beyond the code, that Dexter chooses him over Harry, over Deb, and lets his entire plan for control collapse from the inside? So when the mask finally drops and the ice truck killer steps out as Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother, the entire season snaps into focus. Every dismembered body, every color-coded tableau, every taunting clue wasn't just a criminal pattern. It was a reunion plan. Brian hasn't been hunting Miami. He's been hunting Dexter's attention, engineering an investigation that leads to one destination. You and I are the same. To keep this clear, Brian's real objective is not exposure or escape. It's conversion. He doesn't just want Dexter to accept him as family. He wants Dexter to reject Harry, the code, the illusion of control that has defined Dexter's psychology since childhood. The central question for Brian is simple and terrifying. If Dexter has to choose between the man who caged his darkness and the brother who sanctifies it, who wins? That's why the Rudy persona is so strategic. Brian doesn't kick in the door as a rival predator. He walks in through Deb. The hospital scene with Deb unconscious and vulnerable is the payoff to that long con. Brian has already infiltrated Dexter's life as her boyfriend, already mapped out the emotional architecture of this family. He knows Deb is Dexter's closest human bond and Harry's favorite project. By seducing Deb, he isn't just attacking Dexter's support system. He's proving how easily he can rewrite it. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern. Villains who don't just threaten Dexter's life, but his story about himself. Brian is the prototype. The focus is not just on his kills, but on the offer he places in front of Dexter. No more hunting alone. No more plastic and rules and tedious background checks. Brian offers something Harry never did. Unconditional acceptance of the monster. No restrictions, no guilt, no moral math. We can be who we really are. And Dexter feels it. We watch him pace that kill room, with Deb strapped to the table, the code wobbling like bad lighting. On one side, the ritual Harry designed, a bound victim, a knife, a lesson about justice. On the other, a brother who shares his origin trauma, his blood, his hunger. How tempting is it to imagine a life where the plan is simple: hunt together, kill together, never explain. Dexter's narration admits the pull, then quietly contrasts it with something new and fragile: loyalty to Deb, a loyalty the code never fully accounted for. Brian almost wins here, and not because Deb is seconds from death. The near loss is internal. Dexter stands on that knife's edge, genuinely considering Brian's argument that Harry was wrong, that the code is a cage built on lies, that his true family lives in the darkness, not in the daylight fiction of the Morgans. When Dexter finally kills Brian, it registers as a tactical victory and an emotional stalemate. Brian dies, but the doubt survives. From this point forward, every time Dexter invokes Harry's rules, we can feel Brian's ghost asking, "Whose plan are you really following? And how long before it collapses again?" Brian dies, but the infection doesn't. Killing him doesn't wipe Dexter's hard drive. It installs new, corrosive software. For the first time, Dexter has to live with a question he can't autopsy or bag as evidence. If Harry hid an entire brother, what else did he rewrite? Up to this point, the code feels like scripture. Harry as prophet, Dexter as disciple, the dark passenger as something you manage with ritual and precision. But Brian's existence blows a hole through that mythology. Another baby in the same blood. Another monster forged in the same trauma. One is trained, cataloged, weaponized. The other is abandoned to the system and left to evolve on his own. That isn't a moral framework. That looks like an experiment. To keep this clear, the central question Brian leaves behind isn't, "Am I a killer?" Dexter already knows he is. The question is, who decided what kind of killer I'm allowed to be, and why did they get to choose? Once that thought lands, Harry's code stops reading as a compass and starts looking like a leash, a plan for control, not recovery, a way for a cop with a guilty conscience to turn his foster son into a private cleanup crew. We see the consequences almost immediately in Dexter's psychology. After season 1, he doesn't suddenly become reckless, but the edges fray. He toys with killing Paul Bennett more than he should. He rationalizes the death of an innocent man on his table in season 2 as a necessary adjustment instead of a catastrophic failure of the code. He starts asking himself whether he's following rules or just habits he's afraid to examine too closely. And into that widening gap, other voices rush in. Leela West listens to his NA confessions and offers a philosophy Brian would have loved. No code. No guilt, pure self-expression through destruction. She burns his apartment, kills Dokes, nearly murders Rita and the kids, and still insists she's the only one who truly understands him. Miguel Prado goes one step further. He learns Harry's rules, then mutates them, turning Dexter's supposedly ethical system into a political hit list. Each major section will show the same pattern. Someone steps into the space Brian opened and asks, what if the code is the problem, not the solution? From this angle, Brian's real victory condition was never survival. It was contagion. Plant the doubt, and every future antagonist only has to water it. Leela with passion. Miguel with power. Later, Trinity and the brain surgeon with their own twisted structures. In this video, we're going to track how, from here on out, the show stops treating the code as sacred law and starts treating it as negotiable fine print. Along the way, that shift is exactly what lets the next major threat get so close. If Brian cracked Dexter's faith, Season 2's villain will try to burn the entire altar down, his code, his cover, and every illusion that his life is under control. If Brian was precision, Leela is detonation. Season 2 doesn't give Dexter a mastermind in the shadows. It hands him a live grenade and watches what happens when he hugs it. We open with Dexter already under siege. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation is tightening. Divers are pulling his weighted trash bags out of the ocean, and LaGuardia and Lundy are quietly assembling a profile that points disturbingly close to Miami Metro's own blood guy. At the same time, Dokes is circling on pure instinct, stalking Dexter, blocking his kills, and shredding any illusion that the code can operate smoothly in the real world. The plan is already wobbling. The pressure is already high. Into that pressure cooker walks Lila West. On paper, she's harmless, an artist, an addict in recovery, Dexter's new NA sponsor, but that cover story is exactly why she's so dangerous. To keep this clear, Dexter isn't going to NA because he believes in the program. He's there because he needs a socially acceptable mask for his urges, a way to reframe homicidal compulsion as a manageable addiction. He's vulnerable, performative, and off balance. Lila meets him right there. From the first meeting, she reads him. She's intuitive, impulsive, and drawn to darkness in a way that feels less like empathy and more like appetite. Where Rita asks Dexter to be present, calm, normal, Lila leans in when he's intense, secretive, and broken. The central question for her isn't how do we fix you, it's what are you really hiding? And unlike everyone else in his life, she doesn't flinch when she feels the answer. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this shift. The focus is not just on villains who match Dexter's intellect, but on the ones who corrode his foundations. Lila quickly positions herself as the only person who truly gets his darkness, echoing Brian's unconditional acceptance, but wrapping it in the language of recovery, art, and passion. She tells him his addiction is beautiful, that his urges make him authentic, that control is the real prison. For a man whose entire psychology is built on the code as a containment plan, that is a seductive form of sabotage. And the red flags are immediate. She violates boundaries by showing up uninvited, inserting herself into Dexter's fights with Rita, and escalating every conflict instead of soothing it. When Dexter's apartment becomes a symbol of his double life, she doesn't help him declutter, she burns it down. Literally, what does it say about a sponsor that her idea of healing is arson? Here's the crucial difference from Brian. Brian needed full access to Dexter's history and identity to weaponize it. Lila doesn't. She only has to sense that his life is a fragile scaffolding of lies. NA confessions, half-truths about slipping, the way he reacts when Dokes is mentioned, these are enough. She doesn't know he's the Bay Harbor butcher, but she knows that if she kicks hard enough, something big will collapse. Dexter's attraction to her isn't just sexual, it's existential relief. Around Lila, he doesn't have to pretend the darkness is gone. He can rage, vanish, relapse, and she calls it honesty instead of failure. Each major section of his life so far has required him to fake normalcy. With Lila, that performance drops, and that feels like freedom. But that freedom comes with a cost. Once Dexter gives Lila partial access to his real self, his secrets, his patterns, his enemies, she does what no previous villain has done. She doesn't just move toward his kill table. She starts attacking his life from the outside in. His job, his investigation, his relationships. And the next phase of Season 2 will show how close that chaos comes to finishing what Brian and Dokes started. Lila doesn't start with fire. She starts with a story. In that loft, under the neon of Narcotics Anonymous, she listens to Dexter describe his addiction, with a precision no real addict uses. She hears the ritual, the control, the language of a man describing a code rather than a craving. And instead of backing away, she reframes it. She tells him his darkness is honest, that Rita is a lie, that his guilt over the Bay Harbor butcher investigation is just internalized shame. Her first major play is simple but devastating. Convince Dexter that the family fantasy is the problem, not the killing. To keep this clear, Lila's goal in that moment isn't romance, it's isolation. She weaponizes his fear that he will destroy Rita and the kids, pushing him to protect them by leaving. When Dexter breaks up with Rita, we watch a core stabilizing force in his life snap under pressure from someone who barely knows him, or thinks she barely knows him. because Leela is already escalating. Emotional manipulation turns into logistical sabotage. She accidentally leaves candles burning, stages the apartment fire, and then swoops in as the only safe harbor Dexter has left. No home. No Rita. Just Lila's loft, Lila's rules, Lila's narrative that his old life was always going to collapse. From a burned mattress to a borrowed shirt to shared secrets in the dark, she is engineering dependence, one contingency at a time. And when Dexter pulls away, when he tries to reassert control, we see the next phase of her plan. Retaliation, accusations, false reports. She plays the victim with Miami Metro, manipulates evidence around the theft of her artwork, and then makes the most chilling leap, inserting herself into the Bay Harbor Butcher frame-up. Leela discovers Dokes in the cabin, realizes by implication what Dexter really is, and makes a decision Dexter never authorized. She blows the place sky high. In that explosion, the entire moral architecture of the series shudders. Dokes is many things, but by Harry's code, he is innocent. Yet Leela kills him to protect Dexter's secret, tying Dexter permanently to a murder he did not plan, did not sanction, and would never have allowed under the rules he believes separate him from the monsters he hunts. The central question becomes unavoidable. If someone else kills for Dexter, on his behalf, what does that make him? Along the way, Leela is not just circling Dexter. She infiltrates his workplace. She seduces Angel, plays the wounded artist, and turns the squad into unwitting shields, ready to vouch for her, to see her as a victim rather than a predator. The focus is not just on the bodies that fall, but on the investigation she corrupts and the support system she quietly rewires. Leela's victory condition is never merely survival, it's indispensability. She wants to be the only person who knows Dexter's darkness and has already proven she will kill to preserve it. By the time she's framed Dokes, committed murder for Dexter, and embedded herself in his work and home life, there is only one barrier left between her and total control: his family. And in the next movement of this season, she's going to aim the fire exactly where Dexter can least afford another failure. Leela doesn't just remove that last barrier. She decides to burn it. Once Dexter pulls away, once he chooses Rita and the kids over the chaos Leela offers, her psychology flips. In her mind, this isn't a breakup, it's betrayal. And the central question for her becomes brutally simple. If Dexter won't live in her world, why should he be allowed to live in anyone else's? The focus is not just on hurting him emotionally, it's on erasing the fragile suburban structure that made him believe he could be more than his darkness. So she goes after the softest point in that structure. Not Dexter, not even Rita, Astor and Cody. We watch her lure the kids with practiced charm, the same safe energy that made Rita trust her. Then the doors close, the locks click, and the camera settles into that suffocating apartment. Gas hissing, matches striking, flames beginning to crawl up cheap furniture. Dexter's fantasy of a normal life is literally converted into kindling. The plan he has been running all season: kill bad guys at night, play dad by day, keep everything in neat compartments, collapses into a single choking room. To keep this clear, Leela's attack is not a repeat of Brian's. Brian threatened Deb to force Dexter into a choice between family and the pure, unfiltered dark passenger. Pick me or her. Leela's move is the negative image of that. She threatens the kids because Dexter already chose family over her. This is not recruitment, it's punishment. If she can't occupy the center of his orbit, then nothing else will exist there either. And the near-loss margin here is razor thin. Dexter arrives through smoke and sirens, ripping plastic, breaking through doors, barely dragging Astor and Cody out before the entire apartment becomes an inferno. Shift that timeline by 5 minutes, and what does he lose? Not just Rita's children. He loses the last plausible argument that his life can coexist with normalcy, without putting innocence directly in the blast radius of his secrets. Leela's willingness to kill children also draws a line in the sand that Dexter himself has never crossed. He kills killers. She is willing to incinerate 2 kids who have done nothing except love the man she wants to possess. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these moments because they force Dexter to see that his orbit doesn't just attract damaged people. It attracts people more monstrous than he is. People who use his existence as justification to escalate. Like Brian, Lila offers a form of acceptance. But where Brian's offer is brotherly and seductive, Lila's is possessive and annihilating. If she can't have Dexter, no one can have the life he built. That's why his final trip to Paris doesn't play as triumphant. It's damage control. A belated attempt to seal a leak that already flooded his world. By the time he kills her, the investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher is barely contained, his code is shaken, and his track record is clear. Every confidant becomes a threat. Along the way, that sets the trajectory for Season 3, where the next villain won't just enter as an enemy, he'll walk in as a partner. So when we enter Season 3, Dexter is coming off that chaos with the wrong lesson. He survived Brian. He survived Leela. He slipped through the Bay Harbor butcher investigation. In his mind, the pattern is clear. Every time the walls close in, he still wins. The code works. His plan holds. Maybe he can even upgrade it. That's the headspace where Miguel Prado walks in. Miguel isn't a drifter like Leela or a hidden brother like Brian. He's an assistant district attorney, a public crusader with a sharp suit, a big personality, and a real talent for channeling rage into righteous speeches. From a packed courtroom to a family barbecue, he looks like a man who has already integrated his darkness into a respectable life. To Dexter, that psychology is intoxicating. What if the monster doesn't have to lurk in the shadows? What if it can wear a tie and win elections? Their bond starts, crucially, with a good kill. Dexter goes after Freebo, a low-level killer tied to Miguel's family tragedy. The confrontation is messy. The investigation around Freebo is tense, and when the body hits the floor, Miguel stumbles into the aftermath and doesn't recoil. He doesn't scream. He doesn't call the cops. He covers. In that moment, secrecy, grief, and moral ambiguity fuse into a shared language. They're not hunter and prey. They're co-conspirators. To keep this clear, this is the first time Dexter doesn't just tolerate someone knowing a piece of his truth. He leans in. He decides to teach. He believes he can export Harry's code, as if it's a clean operating system instead of the glitchy patch that barely keeps him functional. That's the fatal miscalculation. Harry built the code around Dexter's specific trauma, his compulsions, his need for structure. Miguel doesn't share that wiring. He shares the anger, but not the brakes. And that difference is exactly why Miguel appeals to him. Unlike Brian, Miguel isn't asking Dexter to abandon his life. Unlike Leela, Miguel isn't dangling chaos and self-destruction. He has a wife, kids, institutional power, and a polished reputation. On paper, he looks like Dexter's endgame, a man who kills in the dark and shakes hands in the daylight. The focus is not just on companionship here, it's on validation. If Miguel can carry the code, doesn't that prove Dexter's system is ethical, controllable, even scalable? This is the psychological trap. Miguel becomes living evidence for the story Dexter wants to believe about himself. Every time Miguel praises the code, every time he frames a murder as justice, Dexter hears confirmation that his own killings were never about ego or impulse. How could they be, if this respectable Otta agrees? But while Dexter is chasing moral reassurance, he's missing the investigation he should be running. Who is Miguel when no one is watching? Because for the first time, the villain isn't stalking Dexter. Dexter is building him. That flips the entire trajectory of the show. When Miguel starts choosing his own targets, bending the rules, and using the code as a weapon for personal vendettas, we watch the plan collapse in slow motion. What happens when a system designed to limit killing becomes a license to expand it? Along the way, Miguel stops being a partner and starts looking like the prototype for something much worse, a dark passenger army. Wearing badges and wielding influence that Dexter can't simply dismember and drop in the ocean. And once Miguel crosses that line, Dexter faces a new kind of failure, not just stopping a killer, but stopping the version of himself he tried to mass produce. So when Dexter finally opens the door and starts teaching, we watch the code do something Harry never planned for. It behaves like a virus. It doesn't just live in Dexter's head anymore. It jumps hosts. To keep this clear, Dexter's induction of Miguel is almost ceremonial. First, he lays out the principles as if they're axioms: only proven killers, absolute certainty, no innocent collateral, meticulous preparation. Then he escalates. He walks Miguel through surveillance, through gathering evidence, through the private investigation that replaces any courtroom. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. When Dexter finally brings Miguel into an actual kill room, it feels like a graduation. Plastic on the walls, the bound target, the photos of victims taped up as justification. Dexter thinks he's tightening control by supervising every step. In reality, he's giving Miguel a template, a script, a portable ideology for violence. This is where the psychology of the code shifts. For Dexter, the ritual is a burden, a leash on the monster, a checklist he clings to so the whole thing doesn't collapse into random slaughter. For Miguel, that first code-approved kill is something else entirely. He doesn't stagger away haunted. He walks out electrified. He's a prosecutor who just learned there's a back door to the justice system, and his best friend is the key. The central question becomes, what happens when someone experiences the code not as constraint, but as permission? Miguel immediately reads it as an expansion of power. The law fails? No problem. The code fills the gap. The focus is not just on removing monsters from society, but on Miguel deciding who counts as a monster. That's the key divergence. Dexter sees rules. Miguel sees a weapon. Where Dexter repeats Harry's language about proof and pattern, Miguel starts talking about people who deserve it. At first, that seems compatible. Corrupt defense attorneys, abusers who walk, figures he can frame as killers in spirit, if not in record. But that tiny semantic shift is the fracture line. Proven killer becomes proven threat, then obstacle, then insult. Along the way, Miguel starts selecting his own targets without Dexter's verification. He uses Dexter's methods, Dexter's confidence, Dexter's blessing, but quietly drops Dexter's standard of evidence. The code, as Harry designed it, is already flawed. In Miguel's hands, it's barely even that. It's a story you tell yourself before you put someone on plastic. And if Miguel isn't stopped, this is the near-loss scenario. We're looking at a scalable model, a charismatic public figure, armed with a righteous narrative and a private executioner's manual, able to recruit others the way Dexter recruited him. Imagine a network of Dexters with Miguel's temperament and none of Dexter's fear of exposure. How long before the bodies stop being hidden and start being messages? That's Dexter's dawning horror. He hasn't just made a tactical mistake, he's created a rival ideology of killing that can outlive him, stain the very idea of controlled vigilantism, and turn Harry's already broken plan into a franchise of moral collapse. And Miguel? He's not content to remain the student. As this season's trajectory sharpens, he's already planning to outgrow Dexter. And he now knows enough about the code, the rituals, and the blind spots to become a lethal, untraceable threat if he slips the leash. Miguel doesn't just slip the leash. He starts building his own kennel. From the moment he walks into crime scenes as an elected hero to the quiet conversations where he nudges Dexter toward bigger prey, we watch the monster factory lose its foreman. Miguel uses the Ada's badge like a hunting license. He steers the investigation toward convenient suspects, buries inconvenient evidence, and cherry-picks targets who advance his career or settle personal vendettas. A corrupt defense attorney, an abusive husband. Each kill is a press conference waiting to happen. To keep this clear, Miguel isn't hiding in shadows the way Dexter has to. He's hiding in plain sight, behind podiums and case files. His public persona becomes a shield Dexter never had. When Miguel walks into Miami Metro, he's not the subject of suspicion. He's the one giving orders, shaping narratives, deciding which threads the investigation pulls and which quietly disappear. If his killings continue, they're not rogue acts. They're actions backed by institutional credibility, the kind of legitimacy that makes him almost impossible to discredit without detonating the entire system around him. And along the way, he's not just manipulating the courts, he's manipulating Dexter. The feigned loyalty, the late-night rooftop confessions, the language of brotherhood that echoes Brian's Season 1 seduction, but with a political edge. Where Brian offers Dexter a family of two, Miguel offers a movement, two dark passengers, united under the code, rewriting justice from the inside. It's intoxicating. It's strategic. It's the central question of this stretch of the season. Is Dexter training an ally or manufacturing his own replacement? Because Miguel's threat isn't just exposure, it's succession. He positions himself as a more powerful, less principled version of the Bay Harbor Butcher, with better PR. Imagine a Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, where the prime suspect is the very Ada leading the task force, already beloved by the public, already framed as the man cleaning up what the law can't touch. How do you catch that? How do you even make people believe it? The nightmare is that Miguel learns the code and the kill room process well enough to weaponize Dexter's own methods against him. Plastic wrap, careful stalking, moral language about deserving it. Miguel can frame Dexter, replicate his rituals, or inspire copycats who all point back to Harry's rules. Suddenly, Dexter's supposed mission looks less like controlled vigilantism and more like pure self-indulgent murder that spawned a franchise. That's the collapse point for Dexter's psychology. He realizes he can't just walk away. Miguel is killed because of him. Miguel knows the system, the tools, the blind spots. Miguel is living proof that the code cannot be safely shared. If one apprentice can drift this far, how many others would turn the plan into open season? So Dexter is forced into a corner. To stop Miguel, he has to kill the fantasy of partnership itself, admit that his darkness cannot be franchised, and accept that anyone who learns the code becomes a future investigation waiting to happen. Dexter ultimately neutralizes Miguel, but the damage is done. The idea is loose now, a dark passenger army, allies who become existential threats. And the next major villain won't be begging for a place at Dexter's table. He'll be standing outside the house, ready to burn Dexter's entire life down instead. So when we move into Season 4, the stakes don't just rise, they mutate. Dexter isn't just a bloodspatter analyst with a hobby anymore. He's a husband, a new father again, and a man trying to run Harry's code on hard mode. Middle of the night feedings, a mortgage, and a kill schedule squeezed into whatever's left. Control, which was always fragile, is now an outright fantasy. Let's kick things off with that image of Dexter nodding off behind the wheel, crashing the car with a body in the trunk. That's the season in miniature. The plan is still there. The ritual is still there, but he's overextended, distracted, and constantly improvising. Every kill now competes with TA meetings, forensics reports, and Rita's suspicions. Into that exhaustion walks the one enemy who can actually use that chaos against him, Arthur Mitchell. On paper, Arthur is Dexter's dream investigation, a long-running, highly ritualized serial killer. 3 linked murders in a cycle, repeated for decades across state lines, with no arrest, no real profile, no collapse of his cover. Trinity is the white whale, proof that someone like Dexter can, apparently, do this forever and never get caught. The central question becomes obvious. Is Arthur the future Dexter thinks he's building toward? To keep this clear, Arthur's surface persona is almost aggressively normal. Devout family man, church deacon, Habitat for Humanity volunteer, literally building houses while hiding bodies. It's Dexter's suburban camouflage, but older, smoother, and more socially embedded. Where Dexter stumbles through small talk at barbecues, Arthur leads prayer circles. Where Dexter fakes empathy, Arthur performs it like a second language he's been speaking for 30 years. That's what makes him uniquely dangerous. Arthur isn't just a killer Dexter wants to stop. He's a living argument against change. Living proof, Dexter thinks, that you can be a monster and still keep a spouse, kids, a legacy. No need to quit. No need to dismantle the dark passenger. Just refine the double life until the edges stop showing. In this video, we're going to see how catastrophic that misreading really is. Dexter's initial approach is not to dismantle Arthur, but to study him. He inserts himself as Kyle Butler, shadowing Trinity on road trips, copying his patterns, even fantasizing about Arthur as a mentor and managing dual identities. The focus is not just on catching a killer, it's on upgrading Dexter's own operating system. What he misses is the cost. Arthur's version of balance is built on terrorizing his family, weaponizing fear and control inside his own home. And while Dexter is busy infiltrating Arthur's life, the information imbalance quietly flips. Trinity notices the lies. He probes. He follows. Eventually, Arthur pierces the mask, learns Dexter's real name, walks into Miami Metro, and glimpses the very family Dexter is trying to protect. For the first time, a villain doesn't just suspect the monster, he meets the man, the father, the weak point. Brian wanted a partner, Leela wanted to save Dexter, Miguel wanted to stand beside him as a dark passenger aristocracy. Arthur is the first villain who fully penetrates Dexter's cover and then chooses a different trajectory. He doesn't want to join him, replace him, or even kill him quickly. He wants to make him suffer. Slowly, precisely, and unlike anyone before, he has the patience and the access to do it right, setting up the most devastating failure of Dexter's entire life. So when Dexter walks through the Mitchell's front door as Kyle Butler, he thinks he's entering a classroom. In his mind, this is a field study in how to be a better monster with better boundaries. A wife, 2 kids, decades of secrecy, and a ritual murder cycle still intact. To him, Arthur looks like proof of concept. We watch him slide into their lives with unnerving ease. Family dinners where Arthur carves the roast and leads grace. Church build projects where they hammer nails and sing hymns. Awkward small talk with Sally in the kitchen while Jonah and Rebecca hover at the edges. On the surface, it scans as strict but functional, a man who has somehow balanced a prolific kill record with TA meetings and Thanksgiving plans. To keep this clear, Dexter isn't just observing, he's projecting. He sees Rita, Astor, and Cody in this tableau. He sees Harrison's future. The central question in his head isn't what's wrong here, but how did you pull this off for 30 years? He treats Arthur's life as a blueprint, a way to refine his own plan for permanent control rather than a crime scene waiting to be processed. Because at first, he edits out the evidence. The way Sally flinches when Arthur raises his voice. The frozen smiles at the dinner table. Jonah's shoulders locked in permanent tension. Rebecca's eyes dropping to her plate the second her father speaks. Small, precise indicators of long-term emotional and physical abuse that any decent investigation of the household would flag immediately. Dexter sees the cracks. He just refuses to read them. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that psychological blind spot. Dexter wants a mentor so badly he manufactures one. Harry's code is already failing to contain the collateral damage of his double life, and instead of questioning the design, he goes shopping for an upgrade. Arthur becomes the fantasy solution, proof that the right system can let you be a devoted family man and an untouchable predator indefinitely. The focus is not just on what Arthur teaches Dexter about kill rituals, stalking patterns, and disposal. It's on what Arthur is quietly learning in return. While Dexter times his surveillance and studies Trinity's cycle, Arthur clocks Dexter's impatience. His need for connection, his sloppy lies about work. Each major section of their interaction is mirrored. Dexter thinks he's infiltrating, but Arthur is just as carefully mapping the soft spots in this strange new friend. Dexter's biggest failure here isn't tactical, it's philosophical. He walks away from those dinners not thinking, this family is a prison, but I can have this too. He internalizes the most dangerous lesson possible, that the double life is sustainable, that the moral and relational collapse we've seen building across season after season can be indefinitely postponed with better routines. By the time he finally acknowledges that the Mitchell home is a hostage situation, not a model, it's too late. Arthur has already extracted what he needs: names, habits, emotional leverage. Dexter believes he's learning how to refine the monster. Arthur is already preparing to demonstrate the consequences of pretending you can be both monster and family man, and he's aiming that demonstration straight at Dexter's house. By the time Dexter finally acknowledges that Arthur isn't a mentor but a contagion, the real damage is already in motion. The investigation we've been watching at Miami Metro is just one battlefield. The other is silent, domestic, and completely undefended. Let's kick things off with the moment Arthur flips the board. He tailgates Kyle Butler through Miami traffic, follows him off the highway, and watches Dexter peel back into a quiet, suburban street. No warehouse, no bachelor apartment. A house. A lawn. Toys. He sees Rita at the door, Harrison in her arms. The exact Norman Rockwell painting Arthur has been performing with his own family. In that instant, the central question shifts, not who is Kyle, but what will hurt this man the way my life hurts me. To keep this clear, Arthur's brilliance is that he doesn't chase the obvious target. He does not try to outmuscle Dexter, outplan him in a kill room, or win a direct clash of dark passengers. He goes around him. He understands, with an almost clinical psychology, that Dexter's real point of control is the fantasy that his code and his rituals create a safe perimeter around his wife and kids. So Arthur makes a different plan. Don't kill the monster. Kill the dream that keeps the monster pretending to be human. We know how that plan cashes out. Dexter thinks he's secured the win, that Trinity is wrapped in plastic and the cycle is over. Then he comes home. The house is quiet. A phone rings unanswered. The baby monitor hisses softly. Harrison is crying on the bathroom floor, sitting in a spreading pool of blood. Above him, Rita's body lies in the bathtub, wrists cut, water turned red. It's a perfect visual echo of the shipping container Dexter can't remember, but can never escape. A mother in blood, a child screaming, a life split in half. This is the closest any villain comes to truly winning, because Arthur doesn't just hurt Dexter in the present, he reaches back into Dexter's origin and forward into his son's trajectory in a single strike. He successfully recreates the formative trauma that birthed Dexter's dark passenger, but this time, Dexter is not the helpless child. He's the failed protector, watching history reboot. What does "I follow the code" mean when your own baby has been baptized in the same horror you were? The focus is not just on the brutality of the kill, but on how precisely it dismantles Dexter's self-mythology. Trinity's act is not impulsive revenge. It is a thematic counterargument. It says, you cannot quarantine violence. You cannot build a normal life on a foundation of secret dismemberment and expect the walls to hold. In that bathroom, every role Dexter clung to collapses at once. Protector, husband, careful student of Harry's rules. The code never accounted for a rival who would target the collateral instead of the culprit. All the precautions, blood slides, kill rooms, double lives, mean nothing against a man who has mapped your priorities and chooses to strike where you are morally, not physically, exposed, and even in death. Arthur keeps winning. Rita is permanently gone. Harrison is permanently marked. Dexter's suburban cover story is not just cracked, it's obliterated. From season 5 onward, everything is fallout from this one failure of control, this one enemy who realized that as long as Dexter exists, the people orbiting him will always be within blast radius. The question after Trinity isn't whether a villain might almost win again. It's whether Dexter's very existence guarantees that eventually someone will. So when Trinity walks out of that bathtub and leaves Rita bleeding behind the shower curtain, the show crosses a line it never really steps back from. Up to that point, every near loss has been building toward this, training both Dexter and us to misread what the real danger actually is. To keep this clear, let's rewind the trajectory. Brian doesn't just outsmart Dexter, he almost converts him. The ice truck killer investigation is a long seduction, a plan where the big twist is not a body reveal, but an identity reveal. Brother, not rival. Partner, not prey. Brian's offer is simple and devastating. Stop pretending, kill Deb. Choose blood over the fake life Harry built. Dexter refuses, but that refusal costs him a brother and locks him deeper into the code Harry designed. Then, Leela takes that same hunger for acceptance and twists it. She listens to his NA confessions, learns the psychology of his addiction, and uses it to burn his life down. She kills Dokes, nearly murders Rita and the kids, and convinces Dexter that his darkness makes him irresistible and untouchable. The plan that worked there, letting someone clean up his mess, teaches him that the consequences can always be outsourced. That is a failure disguised as survival. Miguel is the next escalation. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this mistake. Dexter believing he can control someone else's darkness if he just hands them the code. Miguel doesn't only betray Dexter, he almost mass-produces Harry's system, turning a private ritual into a political weapon. Identity, then trust, then ideology. Each villain leaves a new scar. Brian wounds Dexter's sense of self. Leela poisons his capacity to trust. Miguel corrupts the very rules that were supposed to keep everything contained. And Trinity? Trinity goes for the family fantasy. He smiles at Thanksgiving, walks through Dexter's front door, and proves that the normal life is not a shield but an invitation. The collapse of that plan is total. Rita is dead, Harrison is baptized in blood, and Dexter's last emotional anchor is severed in the exact pattern that created him. By the time we hit the later seasons, Dexter is not a clean slate facing new threats. He is fighting with accumulated damage, compromised judgment, and fewer people, who can pull him back from the edge. The central question stops being, can he stay hidden? And becomes, can he still recognize himself when the next investigation closes in? That's why the pattern shifts. Early villains try to join him, reshape him, or recruit him. Later ones, Jordan Chase, Isaac Serco, the brain surgeon, Oliver Saxon, are far more interested in cornering, exposing, or annihilating him and everyone around him. Jordan weaponizes charisma and groupthink, a public-facing predator who turns crowds into cover. Isaac arrives as a personal vendetta and becomes one of the only antagonists with genuine honor, forcing Dexter to confront what loyalty looks like outside the code. The brain surgeon and Saxon go for legacy and sanity, targeting Vogel, Deb, and the future Dexter imagines for Harrison. Each major section will move faster through these seasons, but deeper into the psychology of how every new enemy exploits the scars the last one left behind. If the early years were about Dexter almost losing control, the later years are about him almost losing himself, and the final villains come terrifyingly close to making sure there is nothing left to save. So when we say the later villains almost erased Dexter, we have to kick things off with the first one, who almost rewrote him from the inside out. Before Trinity stalks the suburbs, or Saxon stalks the hospital, it's Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, who walks Dexter into a kill room and offers not death, but a different life. Deb is on the table, plastic everywhere. The same ritual Dexter uses, but inverted, and what looks, on the surface, like a standard rescue setup is actually a three-way standoff, Brian versus Deb versus Dexter's identity. This isn't get there in time and cut the ropes. The central question is, who does Dexter choose to be when both halves of his past are staring him in the face? To keep this clear, Brian's plan is not improvised chaos. Structurally, it's elegant. He isolates Dexter from the investigation. He lures him away from Miami Metro, away from the comforting illusion of professional control. Then, he straps Deb down, the living embodiment of Harry's code and Dexter's borrowed conscience, and calmly removes her from the equation, all while painting a future where Dexter never has to hide again. The focus is not just on the knife in Brian's hand, but on the promise in his voice. We can be together. No more pretending. For the first time, someone sees Dexter's darkness, names it, and doesn't recoil. For a man whose entire psychology is built on secrecy and performance, that is a devastating offer. What if the only person who truly understands him is the one asking him to let Deb die? Watch Dexter's face in that scene. He doesn't immediately leap into hero mode. There is hesitation, calculation, a flicker of longing. We feel him weighing two codes, the literal rules Harry drilled into him, and the older, bloodier bond of a brother who shared the original trauma. Is it loyalty to Deb and the life he's built? Or loyalty to the part of himself he spent an entire season trying not to remember? And this is where Brian almost wins. Dexter doesn't outplan him. There's no clever trap, no forensic trick. The failure of Brian's design comes down to a razor-thin emotional margin. In the final seconds, Dexter chooses Deb. He chooses the artificial family over the biological one, the restrictive code over the seductive freedom Brian offers. Even Dexter seems surprised by his own decision, as if the choice emerges from a place he hadn't fully mapped. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this template. Brian shows that beating Dexter isn't about stabbing him, it's about permanently rerouting his trajectory. If Dexter had walked out of that room with Brian, every later season collapses into a different nightmare. Instead, Brian dies, but his blueprint survives, isolate the moral tether, weaponize Dexter's need to be seen, and offer a future where the mask can finally drop. Along the way, Almost every major villain will iterate on that design. The question is, who comes closest to finishing the work Brian started? Brian dies on that table, but Dexter doesn't walk away cleansed. He walks away cracked. The body is gone, the investigation is closed, yet the real damage is internal. A grief he can't name. A sense that he has just murdered the only person who ever looked at his darkness and called it beautiful. We watch him bag Brian's remains like any other kill, but the psychology is different. This isn't another monster neutralized. This is a mirror Dexter shatters with his own hands. The central question he can't articulate is brutal. Did he save Deb? Or did he destroy the one version of himself that didn't have to pretend? That buried doubt is a quiet, ongoing failure. It doesn't disappear with the blood. That's where the code starts to wobble. Harry's rules got Dexter through the ice truck killer, but Brian's pitch, "You could be free with me," exposes how conditional that loyalty really is. If Harry's plan was perfect, why did it produce two sons soaked in the same origin trauma, one in a uniform and one on a table? To keep this clear, Brian doesn't just tempt Dexter away from the code, he exposes the code as a choice, not a law. Once Dexter feels that, he can't unfeel it. In this video, we're going to keep circling that paradox. Brian fails in the plot, but wins in Dexter's head. Early season 2 makes it obvious. The ocean dumps get sloppy, the current starts coughing up bags, Dexter's kill rituals slip, his precision blurs, and he starts missing shots he never would have missed in season 1. That's not a triumphant predator tightening control after a victory. That's a destabilized one, testing whether he even believes in his own system anymore. And when someone shows up offering liberation from rules, that crack glows. Brian's fantasy of a life beyond the code is the prototype for every later seduction. Lila promising that his darkness is his true self. Miguel swearing they can weaponize the code together. Jordan Chase preaching that urges are destiny and restraint is the real prison. Each major section of Dexter's life, after Brian is haunted by that original sales pitch. What if control is the cage, not the safeguard? Meanwhile, Deb is no longer just a moral tether. She's a pressure cooker. Brian's abduction leaves her traumatized, jumpy, desperate for stability. Dexter now has to manage her spiraling emotions while burying his own grief and guilt. One more secret, one more performance, one more variable in an already collapsing plan. The focus is not just on Dexter's kills anymore, but on the emotional triage he's forced to run every day. Structurally, Brian's almost win rewires the entire ecosystem. The department is more paranoid. Deb is more damaged. Dexter is more internally divided. So when season 2 opens, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation isn't happening in a vacuum. It's unfolding in the perfect storm Brian left behind. The real big bad isn't just the case file with Dexter's work on it. It's Brian's ghost, Dexter's mounting self-doubt, and the first clear sign that the code can't hold forever. Brian leaves Dexter doubting the code. Season 2 opens by weaponizing that doubt. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation tightens, bodies resurface, and Miami Metro, unknowingly, starts an investigation into Dexter's entire life. So what's the court-ordered solution for a blood spatter analyst with a serial killing problem? Narcotics Anonymous. Harry's elegant monster management system gets translated into the language of rehab. Dexter is forced to stand in a fluorescent church basement and invent a metaphor, turning ritual murder into addiction, the dark passenger into cravings. It's supposed to be a lie, a cover story. But in the process, he accidentally drafts a perfect vulnerability map, how often the urges hit, what triggers them, how he relapses, how he hides. To keep this clear, Season 2 gives us something no other villain gets, a detailed user manual for Dexter Morgan, written by Dexter himself. Enter Leela West. British, chaotic, impulsive, walking into that NA room like a Molotov cocktail with a sponsor badge. Where Rita represents structure, stability, and the fantasy of normality, Leela represents pure volatility. Rita wants Dexter to be better. Leela wants him to be honest. And the second he mentions a dark passenger, she doesn't recoil. She leans in. In this video, we're going to treat that moment as the real inciting incident of Leela's arc, because her fascination isn't with drugs, it's with the psychology of compulsion. She hears Dexter describe losing control, hurting people, lying to everyone. And she doesn't hear warning signs. She hears intimacy, validation, a project. That's what makes her uniquely dangerous. Brian tried to pull Dexter into a new life. Leela tries to radicalize the life he already has. She reframes destruction as authenticity. Rage becomes honesty. Sabotaging his relationships becomes breaking free. Every time Dexter admits to a failure, blowing up at Rita, endangering his job, Leela responds by praising him for being real. She positions herself as the only person who truly understands him, the one witness who won't flinch at his worst impulses. How do you resist a villain who weaponizes your own relief? Her early moves are precise. She pushes him to embrace his urges, to follow the feeling instead of the code. She encourages him to ditch NA, skip work, run from responsibility. When she burns down his apartment, it plays like an accident, but thematically, it's a manifesto. No more trophies, no more order, no more carefully curated double life. Just fire. She wedges herself between Dexter and Rita, between Dexter and Deb, isolating him emotionally, so the only safe confession space left is her. The central question becomes, who is using whom? Dexter thinks he's using Leela as cover, feeding her just enough of the addiction metaphor to explain his erratic behavior. But she is using that metaphor as a blueprint, reverse engineering his triggers and pressure points. Every NA share is another lever she can pull. Compared to Brian's strategy, Leela's is harder to detect. Brian offered a radical new identity: abandon the investigation, run away, kill without rules. Leela offers radical permission inside Dexter's existing trajectory. Keep the job, keep the family, just stop pretending you're in control. The focus is not just on killing, but on dismantling the psychological barriers that kept Dexter partially tethered to Harry's code. And that's the real threat. Leela isn't trying to kill Dexter. She's trying to own him. In a world where most villains aim for his body, she goes for his operating system, and that almost proves more catastrophic than any assassination attempt we've seen so far. Along the way, she'll save him in a way that convinces Dexter his darkness is untouchable. The consequences of that lesson will echo far beyond Season 2. Leela steps into that pressure cooker at the exact moment it's about to blow. Dokes is circling Dexter on pure instinct. Lundy's task force is turning the Bay Harbor butcher from rumor into a mapped investigation, and every bloodslide Dexter ever collected is now potential evidence in someone else's hands. His plan is already under strain before she ever lights a match. To keep this clear, Season 2 is Dexter trying to juggle 3 collapsing fronts at once. He has to keep Dokes off his trail, misdirect a federal task force, and maintain the fragile family fantasy with Rita and the kids. Into that chaos walks Leela, first as the supportive NA sponsor who understands his darkness, then as the saboteur who realizes that understanding is leverage. She listens when he lies about addiction, hears the tremor beneath the script, and files it away. We watch her escalate in precise, weaponized stages. At first, she's the only one he can confess to, the one person he lets see the psychology behind the fake drug story. Then she calls Rita to expose those same secrets, detonating his home life. When Dexter pulls away, she stages the apartment fire, turning her obsession into a crisis he has to manage. Every time he tries to regain control, she inserts herself into the next emergency, making herself indispensable to the very chaos she's creating. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to how villains use Dexter's half-truths against him. Leela is the purest example. She doesn't know the code, but she knows there is a code. She hears him talk about urges like a compulsion he can't quit, senses that the methadone and meetings are a cover story, and treats each confession like a bargaining chip. When he rejects her, she threatens to expose him. When he placates her, she digs for more. How do you neutralize someone who can blow up your life without even knowing the full secret? Then there's the framing. Once Dokes kidnaps Dexter, Leela doesn't just stumble onto that cabin. She turns it into a fulcrum. She finds the slides, sees Dokes locked up, and makes a decision that rewrites the entire investigation. By blowing up the cabin, she erases Dexter's most incriminating trophies and redirects every suspicion, every briefing, every Lundy monologue straight at Dokes. The enemy who is closest to the truth becomes the official Bay Harbor butcher, and Dexter lets that misidentification stand. Seducing Angel looks like random drama until we track the angle. By sleeping with a detective inside Miami Metro, Leela gains access to gossip, case updates, and the emotional pulse of Dexter's second family. It embeds her in the very institution hunting the butcher and makes it politically and personally harder to cut her off. If she talks to Angel at the wrong moment, or vents to Rita, or walks into Lundy's office with one twisted version of Dexter's addiction, his double life doesn't just wobble, it collapses. The focus is not just on how close she comes to killing him, but how close she comes to making everyone else see him as a monster. Unlike Brian, she doesn't need to outsmart the code. She only has to burn down the world around Dexter if she can't own it. For a long stretch of Season 2, it's her moves, not his, that dictate the board. And the terrifying part is, the next villain will study a very similar playbook and push it even further. Leela's endgame doesn't start in Paris. It starts in that cabin, with a gas leak, 2 terrified kids, and Dexter's entire double life compressed into one suffocating room. Let's kick things off with the image. Astor and Cody lured away by the one adult who's been fun, who listens, who says Dexter is the problem. A dark cabin, windows sealed, propane hissing. Dokes' death still hangs over the season like a ghost, because this is Leela weaponizing the same chaos that cleared Dexter once, now turned against the only people anchoring him to normality. She doesn't just put Dexter in danger, she straps his savior complex to a chair and lights a match. Inside, Dexter is trapped with them, literally and psychologically. He has to stay calm while the room fills with gas, while the kids watch his every move. No tools, no prep, no kill room, just raw competence under pressure that no forensics nerd should plausibly have. To keep this clear, this is a strategic corner. If he panics, they die. If he's too capable, he confirms the eerie feeling Astor already has that there's something off about him. How do you play helpless and superhuman at the same time? And over all of this is the moral bind Leela engineered. She's been selling herself as the only person who accepts Dexter, who sees the darkness and doesn't flinch. Then she proves that acceptance is a trap by becoming willing to kill children to keep him. The code says focus on killers who deserve it. The psychology of the moment says forget the code, save the kids, and deal with the consequences later. Which rule wins when the room is filling with poison and the villain is someone you once believed might be your way out? The fallout doesn't end when the fire goes out. It jumps continents. Dexter tracks Lila to Paris, stepping outside his jurisdiction, his cover, and every safety net that's protected him for 2 seasons. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern. The moment Dexter leaves his designed environment, his plan and his illusion of control disintegrate. Paris is the purest version of that. No familiar kill rooms, no convenient ocean, no Miami Metro investigation he can quietly steer, just a foreign city and a high-profile, missing American woman he has visibly followed across the world. The central question becomes, what happens if anything goes sideways? One scream in that loft, one neighbor with a camera phone, one street lens catching them entering together, and Dexter isn't the Bay Harbor butcher anymore. He's an international suspect tied to a dead ex-girlfriend whose disappearance spans 2 countries. There's no way to contain that blast radius. And Lila almost slips it. She's mobile, paranoid, already proven she'll strike preemptively. Dexter's success hinges on the one thing she misreads, his willingness to kill her. Along the way, we watch the show quietly widen the map. Lila is the first villain who nearly forces Dexter to become globally exposed, a prototype for later antagonists who won't just threaten his job or his family, but the borders of his entire world. From here on, every major enemy will test how far that exposure can spread when the plan finally fails. From here on, every major enemy will test how far that exposure can spread when the plan finally fails. And in Season 3, that exposure stops being metaphorical. It walks into Miami Metro, wearing a tailored suit and a district attorney's badge. Miguel Prado isn't a drifter, a pyromaniac, or a secret brother. He's the public face of justice. A high-profile assistant district attorney with deep political roots, a grieving family name, and a reputation as Miami's crusader against violent crime. In court, he's all righteous speeches and moral clarity. Behind closed doors, we see the cracks, a temper that snaps, an ego that cannot tolerate humiliation, and a private rage that doesn't have a healthy outlet. To keep this clear, Dexter has never shared the code with anyone at this point. Harry's rules are sacred. The one piece of control he believes separates him from the monsters he hunts. Miguel is the first person who gets anywhere near that firewall. And it happens because they bond over the one thing Dexter can't resist, righteous anger at a system that keeps failing. The Freebo investigation gives them a shared enemy. Miguel's brother is dead, the case is messy, and the courts are already wobbling toward a familiar collapse. Dexter sees another killer who might walk. Miguel sees his family name being dragged through the mud. When they stand over Freebo's body, when Miguel thanks Dexter for giving him the justice the law could not, we're watching a dangerous convergence. The psychology of a vigilante and the infrastructure of the state clicking into alignment. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between intention and outcome. Here, Dexter's intention is almost noble by his own logic. He thinks if he teaches Miguel the code, not just the killing, but the methodology, the rules, the investigations, the ritual, it will restrain Miguel's volatility. The plan is to create a safer version of himself, a controlled apprentice instead of a loose cannon. That's the pivotal mistake. Brian and Lila tried to drag Dexter out of the code. Miguel is invited in. Brian weaponized family. Lila weaponized intimacy. Miguel is handed a toolkit, victim selection criteria, forensic countermeasures, the illusion of moral procedure. And unlike Brian or Lila, he has institutional power behind him. He can redirect police resources, bury files, steer prosecutions. What happens when the Bay Harbor Butcher's operating system gets installed in the DA's office? Along the way, Miguel escalates at a speed that should terrify us. First, he watches Dexter kill. Then, he participates, savoring the release. Very quickly, he starts choosing his own targets: a defense attorney he hates, people who insult his pride, anyone who threatens his control. He quotes the code back at Dexter while bending it into a justification for personal vendettas. The focus is not just on one corrupted friendship. Structurally, this is the show flirting with a nightmare trajectory. Dexter as patient zero of a network of dark passengers. If Miguel fully masters and adapts the code, Dexter doesn't just have one more body to hide. He has a replicating ideology attached to political machinery. The central question quietly shifts. What if Harry's safeguard was never a shield, but a virus? And what happens when it stops being a private rulebook and starts becoming a contagious belief system that other people are eager to improve? Miguel is the moment that virus tries to escape the lab. The code stops being one man's damaged coping mechanism and starts looking like a pilot program for state-sponsored murder. Let's kick things off with his first so-called code kill, Ethan Turner. On paper, it's perfect. An abusive defense attorney who allegedly murdered his wife and skated on a technicality. Miguel shows Dexter the file, the photos, the pattern of injuries. He speaks Harry's language, repeat offender, clear evidence. The system failed. But look at the psychology under that pitch. Miguel isn't just angry at Ethan for what he did to his wife. He's furious at Ethan for humiliating him in court. A career bruise gets dressed up as righteous vengeance. To keep this clear, Miguel doesn't start by rejecting the code. He starts by bending it. That's the crucial pivot. First, he stretches the definition of proof, so a hunch and some rage feel like a case. Then, he expands victim from unknown innocence to Miguel himself. His ego becomes the invisible name on every bloodslide. The focus is not just on bad people who escape justice, but on anyone who made Miguel feel powerless and can be retrofitted into Dexter's moral framework. And because he's an assistant district attorney, he can do more than choose targets. He can sandbag the investigation before it even exists. We watch him redirect resources, slow walk warrants, and quietly steer colleagues away from inconvenient leads. When Dexter worries about trace evidence or police scrutiny, Miguel's plan is simple. Control the narrative at the source. In hearings, in pre-trial motions, in backroom conversations, he's already rehearsing how to explain away any coincidence that points toward their extracurricular work. Why hide from the investigation when you can run it? Along the way, Dexter's horror starts to crystallize. He thought he was teaching Miguel how to kill safely. Victim selection, ritual, disposal, all the safeguards Harry designed. Instead, he's created a version of himself with fewer restraints and far more institutional cover. Dexter has to dodge Batista, Masuka, and LaGuerta. Miguel has them on speed dial. Who's really in control here? Then comes the psychological reversal. Miguel starts talking about the code like he owns it. He lectures Dexter on commitment. He reframes Dexter's doubts as weakness, as a failure of nerve. When Dexter pushes back on a target, Miguel doesn't argue evidence. He hints at exposure. It's a soft threat. We're in this together, and if you won't go further, maybe you're the real liability. The central question flips from, can Miguel handle this? To can Dexter afford to say no? If Miguel fully operationalizes this, recruiting trusted investigators, grooming junior prosecutors, normalizing off-the-books justice in his office culture, the code stops being a secret between Harry and Dexter. It becomes doctrine. Scalable, exportable, Dexter doesn't need to die for Miguel to beat him. He just needs to watch his private rulebook become a weapon he can't recall and can't outvote. By the time Dexter realizes it, he's not just fighting a man. He's fighting a mutated version of his own guiding principle, now fused with legal authority and public legitimacy. And the nightmare is obvious. What happens if Miguel isn't the last believer, just the first? Miguel isn't just a corrupted disciple anymore. By the time he starts circling the Skinner, we're watching something worse form, a potential alliance between a sanctioned killer in a suit and an unsanctioned monster in the streets. It's the first time Dexter's illusion of control is threatened from above and below at the same time. Let's kick things off with George King, the Skinner. On paper, he should be a standard seasonal predator, brutal, methodical, obsessed with information, leaving flayed bodies that practically beg for an investigation. But that's exactly the problem. His work is already a high-priority case at Miami Metro, which means any contact with him is radioactive. Every new victim ramps up pressure, media attention, political scrutiny. The Skinner doesn't just kill. He drags the entire system to his crime scenes. Into that already volatile trajectory steps Miguel. Once he realizes Dexter is a real solution to his problems, he starts thinking like a strategist, not a student. In this video, we're going to see how his flirtation with using the Skinner as a tool, or at least as a convenient distraction, creates a layered threat, a wildcard killer on the streets, and a politically protected mastermind in the courthouse. Why get his hands dirty when a roaming sadist can keep Miami Metro busy and bloody? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Miguel's external moves, but on his internal psychology. He knows Dexter is hiding something. A missing victim here, an inconsistency there, a suspect who just happens to vanish right after Dexter shows interest. Miguel starts probing. He suggests riskier targets. He pushes Dexter toward personal kills, emotional kills. Anything that might reveal whether this code is a real boundary or just branding. Every reckless proposal is both a loyalty test and a blueprint for future blackmail. Meanwhile, the investigative viz tightens. Miami Metro is closing in on the Skinner through Freebo's orbit, informants, and surveillance. LaGuerta's instincts start pinging on Miguel. The altered case files, the convenient breaks, the smug confidence of a man who thinks the law is a weapon he owns. Deb, as usual, chases every loose thread, pulling on missing persons and street-level whispers that all trace back to the same brutal pattern. 3 investigations, 1 city, 0 slack. And Dexter? He's trying to manage Miguel's ego, evade the Skinner stalking, and subtly steer the police away from both of them without exposing himself. That's not a plan. That's triage. His usual ritualized control collapses under the weight of competing priorities. Does he protect his secret apprentice, neutralize the roaming killer, or keep his colleagues alive and ignorant? The almost checkmate is obvious. If Miguel fully weaponizes the Skinner by pointing him at Dexter or arranging evidence so Dexter looks like the architect behind the Skinner's crimes, there is no clean way out. Miguel knows the code. He knows the plastic, the tools, the ritual, the psychology. Any misstep Dexter makes can be read in the worst possible light by someone with the power to launch an investigation and sell a narrative to a jury. For the first time, Dexter is staring at a villain who can kill him in an alley and bury him in daylight through press conferences and prosecution memos. And the terrifying question hanging over every scene is simple. What happens if Miguel decides to use both options at once? So when Dexter decides Miguel has to die, it isn't a triumphant masterstroke. It's damage control. It's what you do when the fire has already jumped the line and the only plan left is to bulldoze a trench and hope the whole forest doesn't go up. To keep this clear, Dexter isn't outplaying Miguel at the end of Season 3. He's performing triage on a situation he's already lost control of. Miguel has the code. Miguel has a body count that overlaps with Dexter's methods. Miguel has access to case files, patrol routes, and the exact institutional blind spots that once protected Dexter. Killing him is cutting off the noisiest branch of a tree that's already rooted in the Dawes office, the police department, and Dexter's own psychology. And the risks are enormous. This is not a nameless predator pulled from a mugshot database. This is a Prado, a high-profile prosecutor, already under scrutiny, already being quietly side-eyed by LaGuerta. Any misstep in that kill room, any fiber, any camera, any witness, and Miguel's murder doesn't just become a puzzle for Miami Metro. It becomes a spotlight pointed straight at Dexter's double life. We watch Dexter stalk Miguel with the same ritual calm, but the context has shifted. Every step is now threaded through an active investigation, a media cycle, and a courthouse full of people who either idolize Miguel or resent him. The focus is not just on whether Dexter can get away with one more body, but on whether this particular body detonates the Bay Harbor butcher mythology all over again. And Miguel's death doesn't close anything. It opens doors. LaGuerta starts tracing his last movements, checking phone records, revisiting the Ellen Wolf case. Office gossip turns his disappearance into a story, secret meetings, sudden mood swings, questionable legal calls. Patterns emerge in his recent prosecutions that point to a man playing judge, jury, and executioner. Dexter has removed the man but left the footprint. Psychologically, the cost is even higher. Dexter has now killed someone he called friend, someone he mentored, someone he thought could share the burden. What does it do to his sense of self that his first real protch becomes a monster he has to put down? The central question shifts from, can I be understood, to does letting anyone in guarantee their corruption or death? Structurally, the damage is permanent. Miguel has already contaminated the justice system, using the code to steer outcomes, bury enemies, and sanctify murder with legal language. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this. Once the code leaves Dexter's head, it stops being a safeguard and becomes a weapon. Season 3 proves that his rules cannot be safely franchised. Along the way, this failure rewires Dexter's trajectory with future villains. Trinity exploits Dexter's fantasy of a normal family. Isaac Serco exploits his secret attachments. Both are dealing with a man more paranoid, more isolated, more convinced that partnership equals catastrophe because Miguel proved it. Miguel almost wins not by surviving, but by forcing Dexter to see himself as the common denominator in every escalating threat. If the code can be weaponized by a friend, what happens when someone targets something even more fragile than a rulebook, like a wife, a child, or the dream of Sunday breakfast? We're about to meet the man who answers that question, and then Arthur Mitchell walks in, and for a moment, it looks like the universe is rewarding Dexter for all his careful suffering. On paper, Trinity is a legend. 3 victims, 3 roles, 3 ritual poses. A mother in a bathtub, a woman falling to her death, a man bludgeoned with a hammer. Each cycle spaced years apart, each city carefully chosen. Each investigation aging out as detectives retire and evidence degrades. He appears, completes the pattern with surgical precision, and evaporates. No blood slides, no trophies, no obvious code. Just a ghost that keeps resetting the clock on law enforcement failure. To keep this clear, we have to track not just what Trinity does, but what Dexter sees when he looks at him. Because at first, Dexter doesn't see a monster. He sees a blueprint. A man who has been killing for decades. Still free, still meticulous, and somehow still tucking in his kids at night. Church volunteer, charity builder, Habitat for Humanity hammer in hand, a loving wife, 2 children, a house that radiates normalcy. It's everything Dexter claims he can't have without losing control. Handed to him as proof that maybe he was wrong. In this video, we're going to lean on that paradox. The most dangerous threat to Dexter's system isn't the killer who opposes his code. It's the killer who appears to have perfected it. So Dexter flips his usual plan. Instead of stalking from the shadows, he inserts himself into Arthur's life, posing as a fellow family man and eager proc. Breakfast at the Mitchell table. Road trips with the Four Walls One Heart crew. Confessional car rides where Arthur talks about sin, shame, and the burden of secrets. Each major section will show us Dexter getting closer, not as a hunter circling his prey, but as a student desperate for answers. How do you keep this going? How do you kill and still keep your family intact? And this is where the collapse begins. Because Arthur's surface persona doesn't just disarm the police investigation, it disarms Dexter's predator instincts. The church services, the teary confessions, the community projects all lull Dexter into reading Arthur as a dark passenger success story rather than an active, escalating threat. Why question the cracks in the Mitchell household when those cracks might shatter Dexter's own fantasy? Look at the details the show gives us, and Dexter ignores. The way Arthur's son freezes when he speaks. The way his daughter's smile never reaches her eyes. The ritualized control at the dinner table, the sudden flashes of rage, the quiet terror that hangs in the air of that perfect home. These aren't just red flags. They're sirens. Yet Dexter, hypnotized by the promise that he can have it all, files them away as quirks instead of evidence. That's what makes Trinity more dangerous than Brian, Leela, or Miguel. Brian had to drag Dexter back into childhood. Leela had to decode his psychology from NA confessions. Miguel had to be trained in the code and then twist it. Arthur needs none of that. His system is already running, already optimized, already outlasting entire careers in Miami Metro. Dexter isn't teaching this man anything. He's walking into a machine that's been operating longer than he's been killing. The central question of the Trinity arc becomes devastatingly simple. What happens when Dexter's role model turns out to be his most lethal enemy, not just a rival in an alleyway, but a man who can map Dexter's aspirations, infiltrate that dream of Sunday breakfast, and strike where Dexter is softest? How close does that enemy come to destroying everything Dexter cares about? By the time Dexter realizes the answer, he's not fighting for a code or a cover story anymore. He's fighting the consequences of wanting to be Arthur Mitchell. And those consequences are waiting for him in a bathtub. We cut from that bathtub back in time into another one, Arthur Mitchell's pristine, suffocating bathroom, where everything is clean, ordered, and quietly wrong. To keep this clear, we need to sit at his dinner table, walk his hallway, and feel exactly what Dexter feels as he steps into the Mitchell house and mistakes a pressure cooker for a blueprint. Let's kick things off with those first visits. Dexter shows up as Kyle Butler, the grateful mentee, invited into a home that looks like his suburban plan, with Rita made flesh. There's the roast on the table, the church talk, the forced laughter. But watch Sally Mitchell's eyes. Watch Jonah flinch when Arthur's hand moves too fast. Watch Rebecca shrink every time her father's voice tightens. The smiles are there. The terror is louder. We see it. Dexter sees it. He notices the way Sally apologizes for things that aren't her fault. The way the kids monitor Arthur's mood like it's a weather report that could become a hurricane at any second. And yet, he rationalizes. In his psychology of control, this is just the cost of Arthur's compartmentalization, the price of keeping the monster in its box. Dexter tells himself his own family fantasy runs on a different code. He can have Rita, Aster, and Cody without the bruises, without the screaming, without the collapse. But Arthur's control tactics are not a side effect. They are the system. Emotional whiplash keeps everyone off balance. Grand gestures of affection, followed by sudden, icy contempt. Physical intimidation punctuates the rules. A slammed door, a shattered plate, a hand gripping Jonah's neck just a little too long. Then there's the religious guilt, the constant reminders of sin, duty, and sacrifice that turn every act of resistance into a moral failure. This is how Arthur sustains his double life. The family isn't just collateral, they're the architecture of his cover. At the same time, Arthur senses something off about Dexter. Kyle watches too closely. He asks the wrong follow-up questions. So Arthur does something chilling. He channels that suspicion into mentorship. Over beers in the garage, over hushed conversations after church, he offers cryptic advice about managing urges, honoring family obligations, accepting that some things have to be done. Is he warning Dexter? Testing him? Recruiting him? The central question hangs there, unanswered. The focus is not just on Trinity as a monster, but on the mirror he holds up. Dexter watches Arthur juggle church, charity, builds, home, and murder, and takes it as proof that his own trajectory can stretch further. If Arthur can keep this going for 30 years, why can't Dexter refine his plan and do it better? Each major section will show a villain getting 3 moves ahead. Here, Arthur does it by inspiring Dexter instead of threatening him. By the time Dexter recognizes that Arthur's model isn't a high-functioning version of his dream, but its logical, monstrous endpoint, it's too late. He has already brought Trinity to Miami, to Rita's neighborhood, to the edge of his own orbit. Along the way, every new detail Dexter learns about Arthur's patterns, Arthur is quietly collecting about Kyle in return. And that asymmetry is about to flip. The investigation is no longer Dexter studying Trinity from a safe distance. It's Trinity, piece by piece, discovering Dexter Morgan. Thanksgiving is supposed to be Dexter's fantasy of control, made domestic, turkey, family. A polite mask over everything rotten underneath. Instead, Season 4 turns it into a pressure cooker, where 2 predators sit across a table, each pretending to be prey. The investigation has followed Arthur to Miami. Now Dexter walks straight into Arthur's home, and for the first time, his cover has to survive an entire holiday. On paper, the plan looks elegant. Dexter will spend the day as Kyle Butler, observe the Mitchells up close, and extract more data on Trinity's psychology, while Rita and the kids enjoy a normal Thanksgiving without him. To keep this clear, Dexter thinks he's running a controlled experiment, study Arthur's rituals, map his cycles, stay ahead. But the moment he steps into that cramped dining room, he doesn't find a mysterious god of death. He finds a terrified family living under a volcano. Arthur's volatility is everywhere. The forced smiles, the flinches when he raises his voice. Jonah's rebellion finally breaks the script, calling out his father's abuse and threatening to expose the whole performance. And there's Dexter, wedged between his own ringing phone and Arthur's tightening grip on Jonah's throat, watching the fantasy of the perfect family collapse in real time. How long can he sit there, following the code, while a teenage boy is about to be beaten into the floor? This is where the central question of the season shifts. Is Dexter a detached observer, or is he going to intervene? In the bathroom, the answer explodes. Dexter snaps, slams Arthur against the wall, and beats him with a precision that's both brutal and controlled. No syringes, no plastic. No ritual, just raw, physical dominance, delivered by the mild-mannered Kyle, who was supposed to be safe. In that mirror, Arthur doesn't see a helpful friend. He sees a monster who has been hiding in plain sight. Arthur's reaction matters. The fear is immediate. The confusion follows. Who is this man who can overpower him so easily, who knows exactly where to hit and when to stop? Along the way, we watch a dawning awareness settle in. Dexter is not a random church volunteer. He is something far more dangerous, with a violence that doesn't match his story. And Dexter pays for that satisfaction. In that bathroom, he trades stealth for emotional gratification. He abandons the long game of quietly dismantling Trinity in favor of punishing him now, proving to himself that he can protect Jonah in a way Harry's code never accounted for. It feels like a victory. It's actually operational failure. Because from this moment, Arthur starts digging. He follows Dexter. He tests his cover stories. He pieces together the lies, from the fake name to the forensic knowledge that no Kyle Butler should have. The focus is not just on Arthur as a target anymore. Arthur becomes an active, informed threat, adjusting his own plan in response. Thanksgiving isn't a side quest meltdown. It's the pivot point where Trinity stops being a case study and starts hunting back. And the next time Arthur walks into Dexter's life, he won't be coming alone. Thanksgiving ends with Arthur storming out, but the real aftershock hits in the quiet. A minivan in a parking lot. A license plate. A name. This is where the investigation flips, and Trinity stops being a mystery Dexter is solving, and becomes a man methodically solving Dexter. Arthur does what Dexter usually does. He follows. He watches Dexter drive, traces the car back to an address, then to a workplace. A simple DMV search, a little patience, and Kyle Butler dissolves. Dexter Morgan appears in its place. When Arthur finally walks through the glass doors of Miami Metro, we're watching Dexter's own playbook turned against him. To keep this clear, the collapse here isn't just tactical, it's psychological. Under fluorescent lights, the reveal is almost mundane. No dramatic sting, no dark alley, just Arthur Mitchell, cardigan and glasses, strolling through the bullpen as if he belongs there. He sees the badge. He hears the introductions. Dexter Morgan, blood spatter analyst. The man who'd been shadowing him is embedded inside the investigation machine designed to catch people like him. For Arthur, that knowledge lands like a shock and a thrill at the same time. The central question for him shifts. Is Dexter a threat, or is he a reflection? He realizes his supposed student isn't just a curious neighbor. He's a fellow predator, hiding in plain sight, protected by institutional power and a carefully curated family image. That's intoxicating. This is a man who has spent decades evading law enforcement, and now he discovers one of his own living right in the heart of it. The handshake moment is pure nightmare fuel. Dexter is frozen, trying to maintain control, while Arthur smiles for Deb, for Batista, for anyone watching. Fingers clasp, eyes lock, and the small talk is lined with veiled threats. Nice to finally meet you, Dexter. A simple sentence becomes a loaded gun. Arthur knows his real name, his real job, his proximity to Deb. He can call, visit, walk into Miami Metro whenever he wants. What does the code even mean when your target can wander through your office? Dexter's plan up to this point depended on asymmetry. He knew Arthur's pattern, Arthur's family, Arthur's secrets. Now that imbalance evaporates. Dexter is no longer the only one with secret knowledge. Arthur understands exactly how shielded Dexter is by his badge, and how catastrophic exposure would be. Any move Dexter makes risks blowback on his colleagues, his reputation. And the entire Bay Harbor Butcher cover story that Season 2 barely held together. From here, each major section of their cat and mouse game becomes a strategic nightmare. Does Dexter strike fast and risk Arthur screaming his name in front of a squad room? Does he wait and risk Arthur drifting closer to Rita, to the kids, to Deb's desk? Along the way, every delay is another opening for Trinity to test the boundaries of this new power. By the time Arthur walks back out of Miami Metro, he isn't just a case file on Dexter's table anymore. He's an active, informed opponent with a direct line into Dexter's professional world and his personal life, and he's just proven he can stroll through both without being stopped. And the next time Arthur uses that access, he won't settle for a polite introduction. And the next time Arthur uses that access, he doesn't just walk through Miami Metro, he walks straight through Dexter's fantasy of safety. We watch it unfold as a race Dexter thinks he's winning. The airport stakeout, the stolen minivan, Arthur Mitchell humming along to classic rock while Dexter tails him through traffic. On the surface, it's a familiar rhythm. Stalk the target, isolate the target, build the kill room. Dexter even snatches Arthur in broad daylight, drugs him, and strings him up in plastic, like every other trophy on his table. In this video, we're going to sit in that kill room and pay attention to the clock, because the central question in this sequence is not, will Dexter catch Trinity? He does. It's, when did Dexter actually lose? On the table, Dexter has the illusion back. He's dismantled Arthur's mythology, stripped away the pious family man fade, and laid out the full investigation. The bathtub mothers, the bludgeoned fathers, the terrorized sons. Dexter believes he's finally reasserted control over the pattern. He delivers the speech, takes the blood slide, drives the knife home. Problem solved. Threat neutralized. Family safe. Except the timeline is wrong. To keep this clear, we have to reverse the order Dexter experiences it. He imagines the kill as a preemptive strike, a final move before Arthur can retaliate. In reality, Arthur has already been to Dexter's house. He's already stood in that kitchen, already seen the family photos, already made Kyle Butler into Dexter Morgan with a wife named Rita and a baby named Harrison. The plan Dexter thinks is preventative is actually belated damage control. That's the cruelty of the reveal. A ringing phone, a missed call, a baby crying. Dexter walks into the bathroom and finds Rita in the tub, throat slit, water pink, eyes open. Harrison on the floor, sitting in her blood. It's a direct echo of Dexter's own origin. A child screaming in a pool of a parent's blood, a life rewritten in one night. Arthur doesn't just kill Rita, he weaponizes Dexter's foundational trauma and forces it to repeat. And beneath that symbolism is a brutal strategic failure. Dexter has Arthur's pattern mapped. He knows the cycle, the ritual, the escalation. He knows Arthur has already breached Miami Metro. He knows his cover is blown. Yet, he chases the satisfaction of the perfect kill room more than the unglamorous work of locking down his home. The focus is not just on what Arthur does, it's on what Dexter doesn't do. He leaves a door open, literally and metaphorically, long enough for Trinity to walk through. Rita's death is more than a personal tragedy. It's a tactical defeat. Arthur proves a villain can penetrate the most guarded part of Dexter's psychology, his normal family life, and collapse it from within. The consequences radiate outward: Dexter's corrosive guilt, Deb's grief and confusion, the unspoken awareness that proximity to Dexter is lethal, whether you know his secret or not. From this point in the season onward, the trajectory of the entire series bends. Rita's murder crystallizes the thesis of this episode. Sometimes the villains don't almost win. They win exactly where Dexter believed he was untouchable. And along the way, every future threat is filtered through a new, anxious question. Could this be another Rita? That fear will haunt his choices, and in later seasons, it will twist his plans in ways that create a whole new wave of failures. Rita's body in that bathtub doesn't just end a season, it resets Dexter's entire baseline. From that point on, We're not watching the careful predator from early Miami. We're watching a man who has proof that his control is an illusion. He's more reckless, more fatalistic, and quietly convinced that no plan can really protect the people he loves. The Family Man cover he built as armor, Trinity proves it's a target. So Dexter leans into the only thing he thinks he can trust: the kill, the code, the dark passenger. To keep this clear, look at his psychology right after Trinity. He throws himself into work and hunting with a kind of numb intensity. He's quicker to improvise, slower to walk away. He isolates Harrison, pushes Astor and Cody off to Orlando, and starts treating genuine attachment as a liability he can't afford. That isn't growth. That's trauma masquerading as strategy. And that trauma creates openings. He's more willing to push Deb away for her own good, which means she's less in the loop when danger's close in. He takes risks that would have been unthinkable back when the suburban fantasy still felt real. Breaking into Jordan Chase's circle, stalking Boyd Fowler in broad daylight, juggling Lumen's vigilante crusade with single fatherhood, these are not calculated moves. These are flailing attempts to reassert control in a world that already proved it can reach into his home. Enter the post-Trinity villains, each one operating in the shadow Arthur left. Jordan Chase is almost a funhouse reflection of Trinity, a self-help celebrity who preys on survivors and fame instead of nuclear families. He doesn't just threaten Lumen, he weaponizes her trauma and Dexter's guilt, forcing Dexter to risk exposure in highly public spaces. Isaac Serco, by contrast, locks onto Dexter's grief and capacity for attachment. He studies the investigation, sees the cracks, and realizes this isn't an empty monster. This is a man who will move heaven and earth for the few people he still lets in. By the time we reach the brain surgeon, the pattern is explicit. Oliver Saxon targets what little Dexter has left: Deb, Vogel, the fragile sense that he could still exit this life clean. He films his kills, taunts Miami Metro, and at one point has Dexter at gunpoint in a hospital hallway. Dexter survives not because of superior planning, but because Batista happens to walk in. How many times can coincidence save him? Rita's death also shifts Dexter's calculus in quieter, more corrosive ways. He becomes more willing to sacrifice himself if it means ending a threat, but he's also more ready to accept collateral damage as inevitable. If the worst has already happened, what's one more life ruined? Villains exploit that fatalism. Jordan counts on Dexter risking Lumen's sanity. Isaac counts on Dexter caring enough about Deb and Hannah to make mistakes. Saxon counts on Dexter's need for closure to lure him into traps. Miami Metro changes too. Deb hardens, then fractures. LaGuardia grows more suspicious, reopening the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation and turning the institution itself into a threat. The department becomes chaotic, political, easier for external predators to slip through or even turn against Dexter. Every new case is another chance for his past to bleed into the present. So the central question isn't just, did Trinity win? It's how much of every later failure belongs to him. Trinity's real victory is the long-term destabilization of Dexter's world. Jordan, Isaac, Saxon, they all inherit a protagonist already bleeding from a dozen old wounds. And along the way, each major section will show how those late-game threats almost finish what Brian, Leela, Miguel, and Trinity started. Because next, we're diving into the villains who meet Dexter not at his peak, but on the downward slope of his own collapse, and they know exactly where to push. If Brian, Leela, and Miguel crack Dexter's armor from the outside. Arthur Mitchell does something more dangerous. He shows us what Dexter thinks he wants, and why that fantasy is a trap. Trinity isn't just a terrifying serial killer. He's a working blueprint for a life Dexter believes he can control. Let's kick things off with the inversion that makes Season 4 feel so destabilizing. For 3 seasons, Dexter's advantage has been his camouflage, the job at Miami Metro, the blood spatter expertise, the carefully curated image of a harmless lab rat. He's the predator hiding in plain sight. Then we meet Arthur, a married grandfather, long-term homeowner, church deacon, charity builder. He's been killing for decades and still has a tighter family unit and a deeper social network than Dexter has ever managed. The central question becomes, what happens when the monster across from Dexter is more domesticated, more integrated, and more stable than he is? To keep this clear, we have to look at Arthur's ritual as a system, not just a pattern. Bath, jump, bludgeoning, burial, 3 linked murders, each reenacting a trauma from his childhood, each folded into everyday spaces. A woman drowned in a bathtub can be a suicide. A body on the pavement reads as a jumper. A bludgeoning in a derelict building looks like random violence. A burial in fresh concrete vanishes into the city's foundations. It's not just that Arthur kills. It's that his cycle is structurally self-erasing, designed so any investigation fragments into unrelated cases and dead ends. That's why Dexter's usual plan fails on contact. His code assumes he can identify a pattern, confirm the target, and surgically remove the threat. With Trinity, every piece Dexter finds points to a different crime scene, a different persona, a different city. By the time he tracks one aspect, Arthur has already moved on to the next phase. The failure isn't just tactical, it's conceptual. Dexter is trying to solve a closed loop with an open-ended method. Meanwhile, Arthur's public image is doing half the work for him. The focus is not just on his kills, but on how he occupies space, leading prayers, fixing houses, hugging his kids in front of the congregation. Law enforcement sees a pillar of the community. Dexter's own instincts misfire because the mask looks like what he's been told to build. When Dexter volunteers on the Four Walls project, he isn't infiltrating a target. He's touring his own aspirational future. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that irony. Dexter thinks he's studying Trinity to refine his cover, to upgrade his family fantasy, and tighten his control. But Arthur's entire psychological architecture is designed to trap people exactly like him. Damaged boys who grow into men, convinced they can ritualize their trauma into order. By stepping into Arthur's orbit, Dexter isn't just shadowing a killer. He's walking through a guided museum of his own potential collapse, one exhibit away from the moment Trinity stops being a case study and walks straight into his home. And once that happens, the investigation doesn't just fail. It detonates the very idea that Dexter's family can ever be safe. So Dexter does the most dangerous thing a hunter can do. He puts down the rifle, walks into the woods, and asks the wolf to teach him how to live. Under the name Kyle Butler, he inserts himself into Arthur Mitchell's life as if this is just another phase of the investigation. On paper, the plan is surgical: gain Trinity's trust, map his routines, learn how he hides in plain sight, then dismantle him from the inside. But the focus is not just on tactics here, it's on the fantasy underneath them. Dexter isn't only tracking a target, he's studying what looks like a finished version of his own dream of balance. We watch him sit at Arthur's dinner table, passing mashed potatoes, while the Mitchell family sits in rigid silence. The son won't hold eye contact. The daughter's shoulders fold in every time Arthur speaks. A glass breaks, and Arthur's temper detonates so fast the air changes. These are not subtle signals. These are alarms. Yet Dexter files them away as interesting data, instead of immediate evidence of collapse. Because the central question in his mind isn't how do I stop this man? It's, how does he keep all of this going? To keep this clear, think about how Dexter usually operates. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. When he sees volatility or risk, he accelerates. With Trinity, he decelerates. He keeps going to church with Arthur. He helps build houses. He takes family road trips. Each major section of Arthur's life becomes a seminar Dexter can't resist attending, even as the cost of tuition keeps rising. We see the red flags escalate. Arthur's sudden rages in the car. Jonah flinching when his father's hand moves too fast. Sally's brittle hospitality, the way she hovers to preempt any mistake that might trigger him. By any rational measure, this is a household under occupation. Yet Dexter's curiosity and envy override his usual caution. He wants to believe that if Arthur can maintain this double life for decades, then maybe his own trajectory with Rita and the kids isn't doomed. And in that envy, control slips. He lies more sloppily at Miami Metro. He misses windows to kill Arthur cleanly. He lets Trinity walk away from situations that in any other season would have ended in plastic wrap and a bloodslide. Along the way, Arthur's command over his family becomes more obvious, while his suspicions about Kyle start to sharpen. This is a quiet near loss. Every dinner, every car ride, every hymn Dexter mouths in that church deepens his exposure. He's not just in Arthur's world. Arthur is now in his head, reprogramming the psychology of the hunt. How long before that influence moves from Dexter's mind to his home? How long before the student's delay gives the teacher time to strike first? Because once Trinity looks past Kyle Butler and starts seeing Dexter Morgan, the plan doesn't just fail. It hands Arthur the blueprint to hit Dexter where he's weakest, the family he's been trying to protect by learning from a monster. Arthur doesn't catch Dexter with a single dramatic reveal. He catches him the way a lifelong predator notices a wounded animal limping at the edge of the herd. One wrong word here. One off reaction there. And suddenly, Kyle Butler stops being a grieving sponsor and starts looking like a problem to be solved. To keep this clear, we need to zoom in on the tiny fractures. Dexter slips when he talks about his past, offering vague half-memories that don't match the age he claims. He's evasive about family. He's too controlled when Arthur pushes emotional buttons that should hurt. When a man like Trinity confesses to decades of ritualized murder and Kyle barely flinches, that's not empathy. That's an investigation. Arthur has spent a lifetime reading terror, denial, and shame in strangers' faces. His whole cycle depends on knowing when someone will break, when they'll beg, when they'll submit. So when Kyle Butler's affect doesn't track with the story he's selling, Arthur's paranoia doesn't see a social worker in over his head. It sees a hunter pretending to be prey. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter thinks he's projecting and what the villains actually see. With Trinity, the gap becomes lethal. Arthur clocks that Dexter knows too much about his habits, that he appears in the right places at the right times, that his questions aren't the questions of a civilian, but of someone mapping a pattern. From there, the quiet counter-investigation starts. Arthur follows the name Kyle Butler back into the world and finds nothing. No records, no history, no clean paper trail that matches the man in front of him. The central question for Arthur shifts from, why is this man helping me, to who is he really, and what does he want from my family? That's the first real crack in Dexter's plan. He thought he could infiltrate, observe, then execute on his own timetable. Control the proximity. Control the exposure. Control the consequences. Instead, he's given a seasoned killer a fake identity that doesn't hold up to even casual scrutiny. Every coffee, every church visit, Every seemingly benign conversation becomes data for Arthur to process. And this is where the psychology flips. Dexter thinks he's dissecting Trinity's rituals, cataloging weaknesses for the kill room. But Arthur is now the one running the code, test the cover story, probe the emotional armor, watch how Kyle reacts when his family man persona is challenged. Who gets defensive? Who changes the subject? Who lies about where they were and when? From this point on, every interaction is a near-loss scenario. Arthur isn't just a target on Dexter's table anymore. He's a counter-predator who has quietly written Dexter's stolen name on his own internal kill list. The focus is not just on whether Dexter can get to Trinity first, but on whether he even realizes the hunt has become mutual before it's too late. Because once Arthur starts looking for Dexter Morgan instead of Kyle Butler, the trajectory of the season bends toward a single, brutal question: whose home gets hit first? And then the answer walks through Dexter's front door. Arthur doesn't hit Dexter's home with a crowbar or a gun. He rings the bell. He smiles. He introduces himself to Rita as Dexter's friend, Arthur Mitchell, and in that instant, the investigation stops being a hunt out there and becomes an invasion in here. Thanksgiving, the ultimate family ritual, turns into a live grenade placed at the center of Dexter's carefully staged normal life. To keep this clear, the plan Dexter thought he had was simple. Track Trinity, learn his pattern, eliminate him before he ever gets close to Miami Metro, let alone the suburbs. But the moment Arthur is standing in that pastel kitchen, shaking hands with Cody in a store, we can feel the control flip. The killer Dexter is stalking is now touring the fantasy Dexter has built to hide his own psychology. The dinner itself plays like a hostage situation in slow motion. From a distance, it's grace, turkey, polite conversation. Up close, it's Arthur testing boundaries. He probes Dexter with little jabs about church, about honesty, about fathers and sons, watching how Dexter reacts in front of Rita. He drops veiled comments about secrets and sins that sound harmless to everyone else, but to us, they land like coded threats. Is he talking about his own ritual, or hinting that he knows Dexter's? Every line becomes a power play. Arthur praises Harrison with that eerie, performative warmth, as if auditioning for a grandfather role in Dexter's life. He challenges Astor's attitude, asserting moral authority at Dexter's table. He keeps calling him Dexter, pointedly ignoring the Kyle Butler persona that was supposed to be Dexter's shield. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these moments where a single word choice shows whose plan is actually running the room. The near-loss beats stack up fast. Arthur almost slips about the Four Walls charity, about his family, about details that do not match the harmless retiree Dexter has described. Rita's smile falters. We watch her eyes track the tension between these two men, the way Dexter's jaw tightens, the way Arthur's gaze lingers on him a second too long. For a second, we can feel Rita's subconscious trying to surface. Something is wrong here. With Arthur? Yes. But maybe also with Dexter. Deb's presence turns the pressure up another notch. Her cop instincts flicker on when Arthur mentions travel, construction, churches. She has been living inside the Trinity investigation. Now, the unsub is carving the turkey. How many times does she almost ask a follow-up question that would crack Dexter's cover wide open? The central question at that table is no longer who is Trinity. It's how much can Dexter let anyone see before the entire season's trajectory collapses. So Dexter scrambles. In the kitchen, away from the kids, the polite mask drops and we see frantic damage control. He corners Arthur, hisses threats, tries to reassert dominance physically because the psychological battle is slipping away. He raises his voice just enough that Rita can almost hear. He lies about work, about why this man is here, about why he is suddenly so emotional. Each major section of the evening becomes another patch on a sinking boat. Along the way, what was supposed to be Dexter's safest space is revealed as his weakest point. Arthur has walked through the perimeter, tested every relationship, and left with a perfect map of Dexter's life. And if a killer can do that over pumpkin pie, what happens when Dexter finally tries to take the offensive again? So when we cut from that polite suburban reconnaissance to the school carnival, it feels like a gear shift. The same man who was pouring gravy at Thanksgiving is now drifting through bounce houses and raffle tables, hunting Dexter's child in broad daylight. Colorful banners, cheap plastic prizes, the low roar of parents half watching their kids. In that crowd, Arthur Mitchell looks exactly like what he spent a lifetime perfecting, an unremarkable dad with a camera and a patient smile. He moves with this predatory calm, pausing at the game booths, tracking Astor the way Dexter usually tracks his own targets. No mask, no rush, just total control. To keep this clear, this isn't a random escalation. By this point, Arthur knows Dexter is Kyle Butler, knows he's lying about who he is, and senses there's something darker underneath. That knowledge becomes a new kind of plan. He's not just trying to escape an investigation, he's testing the psychology of the man shadowing him. How far can he push before Dexter breaks whatever rules are holding him back? And this is where the code quietly becomes a liability. Dexter has spent an entire season convincing himself he can manage Trinity, study him, even save him, without blowing his cover as a husband, father, and analyst. The focus is not just on catching a killer, but on preserving the fantasy that he can do it while still making school events and barbecues. Arthur walks straight into that fantasy and uses Astor as leverage. We watch Dexter realize, almost too late, what's happening. The phone call, the sudden absence, the mental math of distance and time. Then the frantic race to the school. He's weaving through traffic, rehearsing outcomes, calculating how to confront a man he absolutely knows is a serial killer without detonating his entire life in front of teachers and TA volunteers. When he spots Arthur with Astor, the tension is brutal. One wrong move, 1 second of hesitation, and Arthur walks her right off campus. Dexter has to choose, maintain the Kyle Butler persona and reason with a man who abducts and murders families, or drop the act and physically intervene in a public place that's crawling with potential witnesses. Which failure is worse? He threads the needle, barely, a forced smile, a strained greeting, a desperate insistence that Astor go find Rita. Underneath that thin layer of small talk is the reality that Trinity has just proven he can get within arm's reach of Dexter's children whenever he wants. That near abduction isn't a bluff, it's a demonstration. Along the way, the trajectory of the season quietly snaps. Arthur has identified the one pressure point Dexter cannot ignore: his kids. And if he's willing to test that boundary at a carnival, in this video, we're going to have to ask the central question: what happens when Dexter finally corners him and Trinity decides to make good on the threat? Because the next time Arthur gets close, there won't be a crowd to hide in. There's no music, no plastic, no ritual. Just a parking lot, a white van, and Dexter Morgan making one of the sloppiest moves of his entire career. After the carnival threat to his kids, Dexter doesn't stalk, confirm, prepare. He walks up to Arthur Mitchell in broad daylight, jams a syringe into his neck, and stuffs the Trinity Killer into a vehicle with witnesses everywhere. This is not the code. This is panic, wearing the code's face. To keep this clear, Dexter's original plan this season is textbook: observe Trinity, learn the cycle, build the perfect kill room. Control the environment, control the outcome. But once Arthur brushes up against Cody and Astor, that structure collapses. The central question shifts from how do I stop him to how fast can I make him disappear? And the second Dexter lets urgency replace procedure, he hands Trinity his best chance to escape. Strapped in the back of the van, Arthur immediately starts doing what he always does best, working the psychology of the man across from him. He talks, he probes, he stalls, he calls Dexter Kyle, then deliberately misnames him, pushing for a reaction. Testing how much this supposed family man is willing to reveal. Every question is an investigation. Every pause is a calculation. Why are you doing this? What do you get out of it? What about your family? Arthur can't move much, but he can still chip away at Dexter's illusion of control. He starts framing their encounter as two sinners on the same trajectory. A dark mirror of Brian's pitch back in season 1. Only this time, Dexter isn't in a locked kill room. He's in traffic, surrounded by civilians, vulnerable to sirens, fender benders, random glances through a window. And then the plan actually breaks. Arthur finds the weak point in Dexter's restraints, lunges, and the van becomes a rolling crime scene. Dexter swerves. Horns blare. We watch him try to subdue a full-grown man in the back of a moving vehicle without crashing, without being seen, without leaving a trail of bodies on the highway. Control evaporates into pure damage control. He can't stab. He can't use plastic. He can barely keep the van on the road. Every second that Arthur is half loose is a second where police could pull them over and find the Bay Harbor butcher mid-kidnap. It's a tactical failure disguised as a narrow win. And along the way, we see how thin Dexter's margin really is when the environment isn't tailored to him. The focus is not just on Trinity's strength here, but on Dexter's obsession. He refuses to call the investigation in. He refuses to let anyone else touch Arthur. By dragging Trinity out of a controlled kill room fantasy and into a chaotic road trip, Dexter proves that his need to personally manage this monster is more important to him than basic operational safety. And that choice has consequences. Because Arthur doesn't just survive this abduction. He learns. He tests. He files away every detail about the man who took him and uses that knowledge when he finally slips Dexter's grasp for good. The next time Trinity gets behind a wheel, Dexter won't even know he's racing him home. The next time Trinity gets behind a wheel, he's not racing Dexter home in secret. He's driving straight into Dexter's supposed sanctuary. Bright fluorescent lights, cops shuffling case files, the low hum of phones and printers. Into that everyday noise of investigation and routine, Arthur Mitchell walks through the front doors of Miami Metro in broad daylight, calm as a parishioner entering church. He pauses, scans the room, and then does the most dangerous thing any villain ever does in this series. He asks for Dexter Morgan, by name. No mask, no alias, no hesitation. To keep this clear, this is the moment Dexter's greatest defensive structure flips into an attack vector. For 4 seasons, the plan has been simple. Hide in plain sight. Be the blood spatter analyst, the quiet lab guy, the one person no one would suspect. The badge, the lab coat, the access to crime scenes, all of it has functioned as armor. But the instant Arthur turns that knowledge outward and walks into the building, the job stops being cover and starts being leverage. We watch the collapse in slow motion. Trinity at the front desk, politely insistent. The receptionist, doing her job, broadcasting Dexter's name into the air like a flare. Deborah, Quinn, random officers moving through the frame, brushing past a serial killer who already has a full psychological profile on Dexter as Kyle Butler. They joke, they work, they vent about the case, completely unaware that the man they're hunting is standing close enough to read their ID badges. The near-loss beats stack up. Arthur is guided deeper into the bullpen, step by step, toward Dexter's desk. Every stride is a countdown. If Dexter rounds that corner 10 seconds later, if he stops for coffee, if Masuka pulls him into a side conversation, Arthur reaches the photographs, the blood patterns, the personal items that tie Dexter Morgan to the very investigation chasing Trinity. One misplaced glance at a family photo, one overheard comment about Rita or Harrison, and the entire double life detonates in front of half the homicide division. Instead, Dexter catches sight of him at the last possible angle and yanks the emergency brake on his own plan. Control evaporates. He has to improvise a hallway confrontation. A tense, low-voiced exchange where both men know exactly how exposed they are and exactly how thin the margin is. In this video, we're going to keep returning to these razor-thin margins because they reveal who actually holds power when Dexter's systems are stress-tested. The focus is not just on Trinity's survival here, but on his intent. This visit is not a panicked move. It is a flex. Arthur is signaling that he can stroll through the heart of the investigation, look Dexter's colleagues in the eye, and walk out untouched. He's not merely avoiding capture. He's announcing that the code, the badge, the walls of Miami Metro itself cannot contain him. What does it do to Dexter's psychology when the place he believes is safest becomes a hunting ground aimed at him? Along the way, this single walk through foreshadows the ultimate consequence of underestimating Trinity. If Arthur can invade Dexter's professional safe zone this easily, what's stopping him from stepping into Dexter's personal one next? The answer to that question is waiting at home, behind a bathroom door Dexter opens far too late. That bathroom door is the real ending of the Trinity investigation. But Dexter doesn't know that yet. When we cut back to the plastic, to Arthur Mitchell, wrapped in saran wrap like every other monster on Dexter's table, it plays like closure. It feels, on the surface, like the plan finally worked. Let's kick things off with that image cluster. Arthur strapped down, glasses off, skin washed clean. The room is immaculate, walls shrink-wrapped, tools laid out, blood slides ready. Dexter has rebuilt his illusion of control in miniature, one last time this season. After stalking Arthur as Kyle Butler, surviving the shattered urn, the confrontation in the Mitchell garage, the airport chase, we arrive at the ritual Dexter trusts most. Syringe, plastic, knife, order, but the focus is not just on the logistics of the kill room, it's on the psychology. Because Arthur does something almost no other villain manages on that table, he refuses to break. He doesn't beg. He doesn't bargain. He studies Dexter. He calls him by his real name. He talks about family, and every word lands differently now that we've seen Dexter risk Rita, the kids, even Deb's career to keep this investigation alive. Arthur's taunts are simple, but surgical. He tells Dexter he has a family too. He points out that Dexter is a husband and father who lies, sneaks out, hides a double life in the garage. He suggests, calmly, that they are the same. In season 1, Brian tried to pull Dexter into a shared darkness by offering brotherhood. Trinity does it by offering a mirror. Which is worse? The central question here is not whether Arthur is right, but why his confidence feels earned. Dexter, for his part, believes he's finally outmaneuvered the cycle. He's convinced himself that killing Arthur now will reset the board, end the pattern, protect Rita and Harrison going forward. To keep this clear, in Dexter's mind this is not just another trophy, it's a corrective. Trinity is the ultimate stress test of Harry's code, and Dexter thinks passing that test restores equilibrium. That's why he allows himself a grim satisfaction. He explains Arthur's crimes, he delivers the verdict, he plunges the knife. From Dexter's perspective, the operational failure is over. The investigation is complete. The consequences have been contained to the man on the table. But Arthur keeps threading in a different narrative. He asks about the boy. He mutters that it's already over. He smiles with this eerie, resigned calm that doesn't match someone who believes he's been stopped in time. We feel, even if Dexter doesn't, that we're missing a step in the sequence. What did Arthur do between the garage confrontation and this table? Who else did he visit? Why is he so sure Dexter is too late? Along the way, the scene becomes a paradox. Dexter's cleanest victory is already contaminated by unseen damage. The plastic promises containment, but there's blood seeping under a door we haven't opened yet. And when we finally follow Dexter home, we discover that the real collapse of this season's plan was never going to happen in a kill room. It was always waiting in a bathtub. When Dexter walks into that house, he thinks the season is over. The monster is dead, the family is safe, and we're in epilogue mode. The investigation is closed, the plan has worked, and all that's left is a quick getaway with Rita and the kids. Then we hear it. Harrison's cries, thin and distant, echoing through the walls like an alarm clock going off inside a nightmare. He calls out for Rita. No answer. The camera follows him through that painfully ordinary hallway, every framed photo insisting on a version of Dexter that believes he's achieved balance. Suburban stability. Control, but the sound of the baby keeps pulling us forward. Up the stairs. Toward the bathroom door that will permanently change the trajectory of this show. When Dexter opens it, the fantasy ends in a single shot. Rita's body in the bathtub, water turned thick and red. Her eyes open, skin drained of color, placed with the same ritualistic care Arthur gave to all his victims. On the floor, Harrison sits in a spreading pool of blood, crying, slipping, painting himself in the very origin story Dexter has spent his entire life trying to rationalize. From a baby screaming in a shipping container to a baby screaming on tile, the circle is complete. This isn't just horror, this is design. To keep this clear, the central question is not how could Arthur do this? It's when did he do this? The show answers with a brutal timeline reveal. Trinity got to Rita before Dexter ever wrapped him in plastic. While Dexter was congratulating himself on outsmarting the great white whale of serial killers, Arthur's real victory was already locked in. The kill room scene we just watched, retroactively downgraded from triumph to postscript. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that lag between Dexter's perception of control and the actual consequences already in motion. Here, it's almost mathematical. Dexter's plan assumes linear cause and effect, stalk Arthur, dismantle his pattern, neutralize the threat, go on vacation. But Arthur has been playing a different game. One where the final move doesn't depend on his own survival at all. He can die on Dexter's table and still win. And that's exactly what happens. This is not just a personal loss, another tragic name in Dexter's mental ledger. It's a structural defeat. Rita's death rewires every part of his life. The family fantasy collapses. Harrison inherits the trauma Dexter swore to contain. And the code is exposed as a flimsy firewall that protects no one it claims to serve. What does it mean when the most successful season of Dexter's vigilantism ends with his son being baptized in blood? Along the way, we've seen villains almost outmaneuver him, emotionally, professionally, tactically, but Trinity is the clearest proof that even when Dexter wins the confrontation, he can lose the war. And as we move into the fallout, we have to ask, after this bathtub, was there ever a version of Dexter's story that didn't end in ruin. That bathtub doesn't just echo forward into new blood. It echoes backward through everything we've already seen and thought Dexter survived. We go from Harrison sitting in blood to that original shipping container to a baby Dexter screaming while Brian watches. To keep this clear, Trinity is not inventing a new trauma. He's recreating the primal scene Brian tried to reclaim in season 1. Brian's whole plan was, remember who you are, remember what was done to us, and choose blood over bonds. He hangs Barbie parts, paints crime scenes, kidnaps Deb, and offers Dexter the solution of killing her so the brothers can be together. Dexter refuses. He kills Brian instead. On paper, that's a victory. But Harrison on that bathroom floor is Brian's thesis winning in absentia. The nightmare repeats. The origin story clones itself. The central question Brian posed, are you a brother or a boyfriend, a monster or a man, comes back with a new, more devastating answer. Dexter tried to compartmentalize that failure as a one-time aberration. Trinity makes it feel like destiny. And then there's Lila. Season 2 gives us the arsonist who actually understands Dexter's psychology better than Rita ever does. Lila listens at NA, hears the truth behind the addiction metaphor, and builds a worldview around it. Lean into the darkness, burn anything that threatens it. Love the monster, not the mask. When she kills Dokes and blows up the cabin, Dexter draws the wrong lesson from that investigation. My chaos can be cleaned up. Other people will take the fall. My family fantasy is sustainable. Rita's death is the brutal reversal of that lesson. Trinity proves Lila right while destroying everything she wanted. The people who love Dexter's mask, the dutiful husband, the quirky blood guy, are the ones in the most danger. The focus is not just on the kill, it's on the validation. Lila's creed that normal life around Dexter will end in fire and blood becomes, horrifically, the accurate prediction. Dexter's guilt over both Brian and Lila leaves him wide open here. He killed his brother to protect Deb, then watched Deb spend seasons spiraling once she learns the truth. He hunted Lila down in Paris and executed her without a code-sanctioned justification, then kept living off the lie her crimes enabled. So when Trinity gets past every plan, bypasses the code, and murders Rita anyway, it doesn't feel random. It feels earned. In the worst way. Isn't this what Harry warned him about? Isn't this the bill for every earlier victory that required a body and a cover story? That's what makes Trinity the culmination, not just another escalation. He doesn't only hurt Dexter in the present, he reaches backward and rewrites the entire trajectory. Brian is no longer the brother Dexter stopped. Lila is no longer the mistake he corrected. Those near losses become steps in a staircase, leading straight to this crime scene. And as we move into the aftermath, we have to ask if the past can be reinterpreted this violently. What chance does Dexter have of ever building a future that holds? If Trinity rewrote the past, Season 5 opens by erasing the present. Dexter is standing in a blood-soaked bathroom again, but this time it is not an origin story being created. It is an origin story being repeated. And into that cratered world walks Jordan Chase. On paper, Jordan is everything Trinity is not. No hammer, no altar, no suburban basement. He is a self-help celebrity, a stadium-filling motivational voice preaching take it, now, while secretly running a rape-murder ring with his oldest friends. From the stage lights to the whispered commands in a locker room, we watch him weaponize charisma instead of concrete. The plan is simple. Use influence as camouflage. If Arthur Mitchell was a ghost in the suburbs, Jordan Chase is a brand you cannot turn off. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Jordan as a villain, but on the Dexter he meets. This is Dexter post-Rita, numb, guilty, and almost mechanically attached to punishment as the only thing that makes sense. He is not trying to balance a family anymore. He is not pretending the code is compatible with Ta meetings. He is trying to feel anything besides the ringing absence Trinity left behind. That emotional vacuum changes the stakes. When Dexter locks onto Jordan's group, it is less about curiosity or sport and more about repair. Can he fix the collapse Trinity caused by punishing a different monster? But that is exactly why Jordan can never cast the same shadow. The central question with Trinity was, what if someone understands Dexter's double life better than he does? With Jordan, the question shifts, what if someone has enough reach to expose Dexter, even without understanding him at all? Jordan's power comes from enablers and infrastructure, not intimate psychology. A loyal circle that kidnaps Lumen. A private compound. Lawyers, security, fans who will believe whatever narrative he sells. He does not read Dexter's soul. He reads the room. That difference shapes how close he can get. Trinity walked into Dexter's home and killed Rita because he pierced the disguise. Jordan gets near Dexter by stumbling into the investigation of Kyle Butler and by noticing this quiet blood guy shows up where his victims surface. He corners Dexter in hallways, threatens him in coded language, and we feel the pressure. But we also feel the ceiling. He can blackmail. He can hunt. He can almost expose. He cannot truly break the inner logic of the code the way Arthur did. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that distinction. Jordan forces Dexter into new moral territory, partnering with Lumen, bending Harry's rules, turning a personal vendetta into a joint crusade. Yet all of this unfolds in a world Trinity already shattered. The investigation into Rita's death, the emotional debris, the way Deb is circling the truth, those are Trinity's fingerprints, not Jordan's. So when Jordan almost wins, it feels different. Less cosmic, more procedural. Less end of Dexter's illusion, and more next iteration of the same failing plan. And as Lumen steps into the frame, we have to ask, what happens when Dexter tries to rebuild control, not with a code, but with a partner who shares his damage? Lumen doesn't just walk into Dexter's life. She staggers in out of Trinity's fallout, a living rebuttal to everything he told himself about control and containment. Rita is dead. Harrison sat in blood the way Dexter once did. The code failed at its most basic promise: protect the innocent by targeting the guilty. So when Dexter finds Lumen, tortured, terrified, still in the middle of an ongoing operation, he reads her as a chance to rewrite the narrative. Not another body on his table, but a survivor he can actually help. A victim he can keep from becoming the next shattered origin story. In this video, we're going to treat that alliance as its own experiment, because Lumen isn't just a partner. She's Dexter trying to fix the psychology of what happened to Rita by reversing the roles. Instead of hiding his darkness from family, he offers it to Lumen as a gift, a plan for justice, a ritual that will supposedly give her closure. It feels, briefly, like an evolution. Then, Jordan's network shows us what real systemic horror looks like. Jordan isn't Trinity, stalking alone with a private mythology. His ring, his motivational empire, his rotating cast of accomplices, that's an operation. Multiple sites, years of cover-ups, victims trafficked, recorded, recycled into self-help branding. To keep this clear, Dexter isn't hunting one man, he's walking into a distributed system that's already survived police investigations, media attention, and internal betrayal. And that's where we see a different kind of failure. Dexter is no longer the one setting the tempo. He's reactive, always late. He's cleaning up Boyd's body, erasing evidence in the barrels, scrambling when Liddy's surveillance threatens to expose them. Control slips, because Jordan's machine has been running so long that Dexter's usual kill room choreography starts to look small and improvised. The near-loss moments come fast. Lumen almost recaptured at the campsite. Lumen nearly killed on the boat. Jordan weaponizing her trauma with that calm, rehearsed voice, telling her no one will believe her, that she's broken, that this is who she is now. Each encounter isn't just physical danger, it's an attempt to collapse her will, and, by extension, Dexter's new moral story about himself. If Lumen breaks, what does that say about the code he's trying to retrofit into a healing ritual? The central question here isn't whether Jordan can outfight Dexter, it's whether he can exhaust him, through sheer scale, through the implication that for every accomplice they catch, there's another facilitator, another client list, another recording. Jordan's closest brush with victory isn't killing Dexter, it's almost convincing him that this kind of abuse is a hydra. You don't end it, you just interrupt it until the next head grows back. Because if Dexter accepts that, if he believes the cycle can't be ended, only paused, then his work with Lumen stops being salvation and becomes complicity, a brief, bloody maintenance of a system he cannot actually dismantle. And when Lumen finally looks at him and says she's done, that the darkness left with Jordan, we have to ask, did Dexter just save someone? Or did he prove Jordan right about how temporary any break in the cycle really is? Miguel is the moment we realize Jordan and Trinity are not anomalies. They're upgrades. Iterations of a design flaw that first shows up in Season 3, wearing a tailored suit and a grieving smile. Let's kick things off by rewinding to that friendship, because on paper, Miguel looks like Dexter's best plan. A high-profile prosecutor, furious over his brother's murder, drawn to vigilantism. He finds comfort in Dexter's calm presence, in the promise of control. They bond over justice, over the failures of the system, over the fantasy that two men operating in the shadows can fix what the courts cannot. Then Miguel learns the truth, learns the code, and instead of recoiling, he leans in. From the second Dexter walks him through a kill, the trajectory shifts. Miguel doesn't just want to participate, he wants to scale. He talks about future targets, about cleaning up Miami, about who deserves their attention. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Dexter thinks he's onboarding a careful apprentice. In reality, he's open sourcing his pathology to a man whose psychology is wired for power, rage, and political advantage. To keep this clear, Miguel is not just another chaotic partner like Leela or a trauma-bound ally like Lumen. He is the prototype for systemic evil in Dexter's world. The moment he starts distorting the code, using it to eliminate personal enemies, to settle scores, to protect his public image, we can already see the blueprint for Jordan Chase's self-help cult and the Trinity Killer's rigid, ritualized certainty. Miguel hears the same rules Harry gave Dexter and immediately translates them into a doctrine that justifies anything he already wants to do. That's the central question Miguel raises. What happens when Dexter's private myth of controlled killing becomes a shared ideology? Jordan will build a ring of enablers around that idea. Trinity will build a family around it. Miguel tries to build an army. He imagines multiple dark passengers, all coordinated, all sanctioned by a perverted version of the code. If Dexter doesn't stop him, we're not just talking about one serial killer with a careful ritual. We're talking about a political killing machine with legal cover. Miguel dies before that army forms, so on the surface, the plan fails. Dexter regains control. The investigation closes, but conceptually, this is a near loss. For several episodes, Dexter experiments with legitimizing himself through Miguel, half believing that if someone as important as a prosecutor agrees with him, his urges might actually be righteous. He almost multiplies his own damage output and calls it progress. Along the way, the show plants a deeper fear that keeps echoing. People close to Dexter don't just get hurt. They either end up dead like Rita or twisted like Miguel. When New Blood has Dexter worrying that his darkness is contagious, that Harrison might have inherited it, that's not a new anxiety. It's Miguel's ghost. It's the memory of watching his private sickness become aspirational to someone else. And realizing that the real collapse wouldn't be getting caught, it would be being believed. And once we've seen Miguel, every future ally and every new ideology around killing carries that same question. Is Dexter stopping monsters or training them? If Miguel is the nightmare of Dexter's influence spreading, Isaac Serco is the nightmare of Dexter finally meeting his reflection. Not a fanboy, not a disciple, a rival predator with his own code, his own grief, and no interest in being taught. Let's kick things off with who Isaac actually is. In Season 7, we meet him as a cool, precise mob enforcer for the Koshka Brotherhood, flying into Miami after Victor Baskov disappears. On paper, this is just another criminal investigation brushing against Dexter's work life. But the central question isn't will Isaac find the Bay Harbor butcher? It's what happens when Dexter's private psychology gets mirrored back at him by someone equally dangerous. Because Victor isn't just an underling. He's Isaac's secret lover. The man whose body Dexter has already wrapped in plastic and sliced apart in a kill room. That loss turns Isaac's plan from routine damage control into a personal vendetta, and it deliberately echoes Dexter's post-Rita collapse. Both men are killers who suddenly feel something tear open inside them. Both respond by tightening their sense of control and going hunting. To keep this clear, Isaac's first move is not to storm the station or shoot up Miami Metro. He watches. He traces Victor's last movements, follows the evidence trail to the boat slips, notices the inconsistencies around the blood work and the missing security footage. While LaGuerta is reviving the Bay Harbor butcher investigation on paper, Isaac is running the same case in the shadows, but with better instincts. He zeroes in on Dexter, not as a random suspect, but as the only person whose secrecy matches the precision of the crime. And then, crucially, he doesn't just try to kill him. In the bar confrontation, in the sniper setup, even when he has Dexter pinned behind cover, Isaac holds back. He talks. He probes. He wants to understand the man who took Victor from him. Why? Because Isaac recognizes something that most villains miss. Dexter isn't chaos. He's ritual. He's structure. He's a man hiding a wound behind a ritualized code. The focus is not just on the bullets Isaac could have fired, but on the questions he chooses instead. Who taught you to do this? How do you live with what you are? What did Victor mean to you, compared to what Rita, or Lumen, or even Deb mean to Dexter? Every time Isaac spares him, Dexter's usual survival story, outsmart, outmaneuver, outkill, quietly fails. He isn't being beaten physically, he's being read. Along the way, Isaac offers Dexter something no one else has, the possibility of a shared understanding. Two professional killers, both defined by love and loss, both pretending their plans are about justice when they're really about pain. Isaac's near win isn't a body on the floor. It's the temptation that Dexter could stop pretending to be unique, admit what he truly is, and stand beside someone who already knows. If Brian tried to make Dexter choose family, and Miguel tried to make him choose power, Isaac is the first villain to make him choose honesty. What happens when that offer comes with a gun to his head and a mirror held up to his soul? So when Isaac finally slides into that chair across from Dexter in the coffee shop, the gun isn't the most dangerous thing on the table. The real weapon is recognition. Two killers, framed by latte foam and background chatter, talking about love and inevitability, while no one around them has any idea what's actually at stake. To keep this clear, this is not a cat and mouse ambush. It's a negotiation of identities. Isaac isn't trying to expose Dexter or bargain for his own survival. He's already accepted the investigation closing in on him. What he wants is to pull Dexter out of the fantasy that he can keep killing and still pretend to be a normal father, a normal colleague, a man with a plan that won't eventually collapse. Isaac lays out his worldview with brutal calm. Men like them don't get to change what they are. They don't get redemption arcs or clean exits. The only choice left is who they care about as the consequences stack up. For Isaac, that's Victor. For Dexter, Isaac correctly guesses, it's Harrison. The central question Isaac poses is simple and terrifying. If you can't stop, why not at least stop lying to yourself about what you're doing to the people you love? This is where the scene cuts deeper than Brian or Lila. Brian wanted Dexter to reject the code entirely and revel in pure bloodlust. Lila wanted him to worship his true self and burn everything else down. Isaac does something far more dangerous. He accepts the code as a coping mechanism, then gently dismantles its psychology. He tells Dexter that Harry's rules won't protect Harrison, just as Isaac's own discipline couldn't protect Victor. Different systems, same failure, and Dexter feels it. We can see Rita's blood in that bathtub without the show cutting back. We can see Harrison on that blood-spattered floor, mirroring Dexter's own origin. Isaac is not threatening Harrison in that moment. He's predicting Harrison's fate if Dexter keeps pretending control is enough. The focus is not just on whether Dexter survives this coffee shop standoff, but on whether his entire life plan survives Isaac's diagnosis. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these inflection points where Dexter almost chooses comfort over change. Along the way, Isaac stands out because he doesn't promise chaos or power. He promises companionship in the truth. Imagine Dexter accepting that offer. Two predators acknowledging what they are, coordinating kills, managing their double lives like a joint project. No more lies to Deb. No more illusions about quitting. Just a mature, efficient, utterly doomed partnership. That's the near loss here. Not that Isaac almost kills Dexter, but that Dexter almost lets Isaac talk him into a future where resistance is pointless and honesty replaces growth. It echoes Brian and Lila, but stripped of adolescent fantasy. This is the adult version of giving in. So why doesn't he take it? And what happens when the next villain doesn't offer understanding, but uses that same insight to go straight for Dexter's family instead? Because that's the shift right here. Isaac offers surrender as intimacy, and Dexter steps back. In that hesitation, we finally see the outline of something bigger than one mobster, one season, one investigation gone wrong. We see the pattern. From Brian's doll part tableau, to Lila's candles and gasoline, from Miguel's bloody trophies to Trinity's suburban baptisms, the show keeps circling the same unnerving idea. The people who come closest to killing Dexter are never just hunters. They are interpreters. They read him. They understand a version of Dexter that he hasn't caught up to yet. And they weaponize that insight long before he realizes he's already on their board. To keep this clear, we can track almost every major antagonist through the same recurring stages. First, curiosity. Dexter is intrigued by Brian's artistry, Lila's chaos, Miguel's righteous fury, Trinity's apparent balance, Jordan's charisma, Isaac's devotion, Vogel's clinical certainty, Saxon's cold precision. Then, proximity. He lets them in. He dates them, mentors them, works alongside them, or lets them sit across from him on a therapist's couch. After that, emotional compromise. Brian touches the origin wound, promising a family that embraces his darkness. Leela offers to see everything and still stay. Miguel feeds his ego, telling him the code is a crown, not a cage. Trinity sells the fantasy that a monster can still protect a family. Jordan flatters his public image as a survivor. Isaac proves he can attach, that he is capable of something like love. Vogel reopens the mother wound by calling herself his creator. Saxon tempts him with legacy, a genetic mirror who could carry the darkness forward. Then, the same trajectory every time. Loss of control. The plan fractures. Brian nearly convinces him to trade Deborah for brotherhood. Leela burns down his life and almost kills Rita and the kids. Miguel twists the code into a political hit list. Trinity walks straight into Dexter's home and leaves Harrison in a recreation of Dexter's own childhood trauma. Jordan turns Lumen into a hostage and a brand. Isaac drags him into a gang war. Daniel uses Vogel as both shield and lure. Saxon survives, escapes, and has Dexter at gunpoint in a hospital corridor. And finally, the desperate scramble. Kill rooms improvised. Alibis patched. Evidence planted. Relationships sacrificed. Each major section will show that by the time Dexter recognizes the threat, he's already reacting, not directing. Control is an afterimage. Here's the paradox. The more Dexter refines the code, the more predictable he becomes. His rituals, his rules, his emotional weak spots, these are patterns, not just to law enforcement, but to predators studying his psychology rather than his crimes. So if the pattern is this obvious in hindsight, why does he keep walking into the same trap? Is the real danger Brian, Leela, Miguel, Trinity, Jordan, Isaac, Vogel, Saxon, or the part of Dexter that needs to believe he can manage all of them? In the next section, we're going to follow that question to its logical conclusion. What actually keeps him alive, and what that survival really costs. If the enemies keep changing, but the trap feels the same. That's because the battlefield keeps moving closer to Dexter's heart. The focus is not just on who outsmarts him in an investigation, but on who gets close enough that killing them would mean killing a piece of himself. Let's kick things off with where that vulnerability is born. In Season 1, Dexter tells us he doesn't feel. He's a detached observer, a predator running Harry's code like software. But Brian walks in with a blood-soaked family history and offers something Dexter has never had: belonging. Not a cover, not a plan, not a code. A brother. On that kill table, with Deb strapped down, Brian is inches away from winning, not because he's stronger, but because Dexter hesitates. For a moment, the trajectory could tilt toward two brothers, remaking Miami together. The near failure is emotional. He almost chooses connection over the fragile order Harry built. Season 2 deepens that crack. Leela doesn't just accept Dexter. She worships the dark passenger. She listens at NA, burns his apartment, kills Dokes, and calls it love. She offers unconditional acceptance of his worst self, with no rules, no consequences, no control. Dexter almost lets her rewrite the code as pure self-indulgence. The fact that she frames Dokes and survives long enough to nearly murder Rita and the kids is the price of that emotional drift. He wanted to be understood. She weaponized that need. By Season 3, Miguel Prado upgrades the threat. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. Every time Dexter expands his emotional life, he creates a new attack surface. Miguel doesn't just want friendship, he wants brotherhood inside the kill. He learns the code, twists it into a political hit list, and nearly turns Dexter's private ritual into a franchise. The failure here is terrifyingly simple. Dexter wanted a partner, Miguel wanted power. That mismatch almost unleashes a dark passenger army under Dexter's brand. Then, Trinity changes everything. Arthur Mitchell doesn't seduce Dexter with brotherhood. he exposes Dexter's attachment to the one thing he can't kill for: family. Dexter infiltrates Trinity's life thinking he's in control, but Arthur is the one who ultimately walks into Dexter's home, finds Rita, and leaves Harrison in a mirror of the original crime scene. This isn't just operational failure, it's emotional checkmate. Trinity strikes at the anchor that made Dexter believe he could be both killer and husband. Later seasons only escalate this psychological warfare. Jordan Chase chips away at Dexter's need for control, turning the hunt into a stage-managed game. Isaac Serco, through his grief, forces Dexter to confront his own capacity for loyalty. Vogel and the brain surgeon dangle maternal validation, recoding Harry's experiment as a twisted family project. Saxon, with that cold camera lens, goes after Dexter's last illusion that he can leave a clean legacy for Harrison. Every escape, every near death, is tied to a feeling Dexter recognized just one beat too late. So, is Dexter's weakness that he doesn't feel enough, or that by the time he finally does, someone else is already writing the script? In the next section, we'll track how those delayed realizations don't just endanger him, they systematically erase everyone who ever believed in him. Those delayed realizations don't just erase people emotionally, they leave a measurable trail. If we treated Dexter's life like an investigation ledger, every time a villain almost wins, another name gets inked in red. Let's kick things off with the first big entry. Deborah. Brian doesn't just threaten her life, he rewrites her trajectory. She wakes up from that plastic-wrapped nightmare and never really steps out of it. Her career becomes an extended reaction to that failure of protection, chasing the ice truck killer, then the Bay Harbor butcher. Then every new monster, as if solving enough cases could close her own file. It never does. By the time LaGuardia dies in that shipping container, Deb's psyche is already hanging by a thread Dexter helped fray. From a cabin explosion to a lakeside crime scene, Rita and Dokes are the cost of Season 2's survival. Leela kills Dokes to save Dexter's secret, and Miami Metro writes him off as the Bay Harbor butcher. Dexter walks away clean on paper, but weaker in reality. He's lost the one colleague who truly saw him. He's inherited a myth that will haunt every future investigation, and he's learned the worst lesson, that someone else can take the fall. The focus is not just on what Leela destroys, but on how that destruction convinces Dexter his code can coexist with normal life. Rita's death is Trinity's delayed victory. Dexter wins the hunt, but Arthur Mitchell still gets past the plan, past the kill room, and straight into the bathtub. Harrison ends up sitting in blood, just like baby Dexter, and that single image adds a permanent line to the ledger: generational trauma. From that moment on, Harrison isn't just a son. He's living evidence that Dexter's control is a lie. How do you claim the code protects the innocent when your own child is baptized in collateral damage? LaGuardia and Lundy mark another category of loss: institutional stability. Lundy dies chasing Trinity. LaGuardia dies chasing the Bay Harbor butcher. Two of the sharpest investigators in the series are removed not because they were wrong, but because they were too close to being right. Each death leaves Miami Metro more paranoid, more politicized, more willing to accept easy answers. The press leans harder into the butcher legend. The public leans harder into fear, and Dexter's margin for error shrinks as every new body connects back to an old ghost. By the time we reach Oliver Saxon and Iron Lake, the ledger is overflowing. Innocents from Jordan Chase's circle, Isaac Serco's rivals, Saxon's filmed victims, and finally, Logan and New Blood, all stack up as names Dexter never planned to sacrifice, yet sacrificed anyway. Each major section of his life closes with fewer allies, deeper scrutiny, and a heavier psychological bill. In this video, we're going to argue that Dexter never truly beats his villains. He survives them on credit. The central question becomes, when does that debt come due, and who ends up paying the final balance? And that brings us to the uncomfortable answer. Hiding underneath all those near misses, Dexter doesn't just get lucky. He actively refuses to learn. The illusion of control isn't a side effect of his life. It's the operating system. Without it, everything collapses. To keep this clear, we have to start with Dexter's core myth. Harry's code plus meticulous planning equals safety. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. On paper, it's airtight. In practice, every major villain quietly proves the opposite. Brian doesn't beat Dexter in a lab or an investigation. He beats him in a freezer, with a childhood photo and the promise of belonging. Trinity doesn't out-hack Dexter's forensics. He walks straight into Dexter's home, into his marriage, into his family fantasy. The more Dexter trusts the plan, the easier he is to ambush. In this video, we're going to track how survival itself becomes Dexter's favorite confirmation bias. Brian's death should be a shattering moment. Dexter almost kills Deb, almost abandons the life Harry built, almost embraces the brother who represents pure, unfiltered predation. He chooses Deb instead, but what lesson does he take? Not that he is vulnerable to emotional manipulation, but that he can balance darkness and normalcy if he just stays disciplined. He walks away thinking the code held. Leela repeats the pattern in Season 2. She hears his NA confessions, burns his apartment, kills Dokes, nearly incinerates Rita and the kids. Dexter survives by inches. Yet, Leela's death convinces him his secret is ultimately protectable. If he can improvise his way out of the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation and still keep the slides, the job, the family, doesn't that mean the system works? The failure becomes proof of concept. Miguel is even more explicit. Dexter teaches him the code, watches him twist it into a political hit list, then ends up killing the very apprentice he designed. Any reasonable assessment would say, the code cannot be exported, and maybe it's not moral at all. Instead, Miguel's death convinces Dexter he can control apprentices as long as he's more selective. Trinity does the same thing on a grander scale. Arthur discovers his alias, invades his home, murders Rita, recreates Dexter's origin story with Harrison. The only logical conclusion is that you cannot have both family and the table. Dexter's conclusion? He just chose the wrong family, the wrong cover, the wrong timing. The psychology here is a loop. Crisis hits, Dexter adapts in the short term, tightens procedures, shifts tactics, but once the immediate threat passes, he snaps back to the same triad: overconfidence, compartmentalization, emotional denial. We see it with Jordan Chase, Isaac Serco, the brain surgeon, Oliver Saxon. Each season forces a tweak. None of them altered the trajectory. Why doesn't he ever really update the story he tells himself? Because he can't afford to. The central question for Dexter is not, am I safe? But am I in control? If he fully acknowledged how often he almost died, how frequently his plans fail, the illusion that keeps the dark passenger caged would fracture. The very mindset that lets him keep killing is the same mindset that keeps putting him in these almost game-over scenarios. Along the way, every close call becomes another brick in a crumbling wall he has to pretend is still solid, and that denial sets the stage for the next escalation, when the illusion finally breaks, not around Dexter, but inside the people closest to him. And that denial doesn't just live in Dexter. It seeps into the one person who keeps dragging him back from the edge without ever really seeing what she's holding on to: Deborah Morgan. From the moment she bounces into homicide in season 1, swearing, over-caffeinated, desperate to prove herself, Deb becomes the accidental firewall between Dexter and total collapse. She dates the ice truck killer. She almost dies on that plastic wrap table, and her survival forces Dexter to choose, brother or sister, past or present. In saving Deb and killing Brian, he preserves his cover and his plan for control, but he also plants the first crack in her psychology, because he has to lie about everything that happened, and she has to live with a trauma that never quite adds up. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the moments where Deb literally walks into danger. It's on the way every major investigation she touches unknowingly closes the jaws on Dexter, then somehow snaps shut on her instead. In season 2, her work on the Bay Harbor Butcher case turns his blood slides, his ocean dumps, his ritual into evidence chains and profile notes. She's circling him without knowing it. When Leela kills Dokes and frames him, the investigation resolves. Dexter escapes. Deb doesn't. She has to process that her mentor was supposedly a serial killer, that the institution she worships missed it, and that justice is a story people agree to believe. By the time we hit Jordan Chase, Deb is harder, sharper, more suspicious. She leads the Barrel Girl case with a fury that nearly exposes Dexter and Lumen multiple times. Yet again, her instincts are right, her trajectory is true, and yet again, the outcome is bent. Chase dies off book. The official story is a compromise. Deb chooses not to look behind the plastic sheeting in that warehouse. That's a victory for Dexter's freedom, but a failure for Deb's identity as a cop. What does it mean when your gut screams something is wrong and you walk away anyway? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that question, because each major section will show a new version of the same pattern. LaGuerta's investigation into the Bay Harbor Butcher reopens every doubt Deb buried. When Deb finds Dexter in the shipping container, knife raised over LaGuerta, she becomes the final line of defense and the executioner in the same heartbeat. Pulling that trigger doesn't just save Dexter from prison. It kills the last clean part of how Deb sees herself. By the time Vogel and Saxon enter the picture, Deb is running on fumes. She's quit the job. She's drowning in guilt, pills, and resentment. The central question Dexter needs her to answer now, am I still human? Can I be better? Is the one she's least capable of holding. Saxon menaces Dexter, but the real erosion has already happened in Deb. The villains didn't just attack him, they hollowed out the only conscience that ever had a chance of stopping him. So when Dexter finally needs a moral anchor, all that's left is a woman who's been dragged through every near miss, every cover-up, every collapsed plan, until she can't see a way out for either of them. Deb's gone as a functioning compass, and that's the moment the real inheritance snaps into focus. If the conscience is hollowed out, what's left? The legacy of every villain who ever got a foothold in Dexter's psychology. Let's kick things off with Brian, because he's the first one who tells Dexter something Harry never does. You're not broken. You're chosen. From the ice rink tableau to the chopped up Barbie parts, Brian isn't just taunting Miami Metro, he's courting Dexter's dark passenger. He offers a new plan, not Harry's project, not a managed symptom, but a shared identity. Brother and brother, predator and predator. No code, no pretense. When Dexter stands over Deb's bound body and actually hesitates, we see the seed take root. The dark passenger is no longer just a rule-bound tool. It wants. It chooses. It almost picks Brian. From there, each major section will feel less like Dexter resisting evil and more like him negotiating with it. Leela validates the most dangerous angle, passion. She hears his NA confessions, burns his apartment, kills Dokes, and then tries to blow up Rita and the kids. And what does Dexter learn? Not that the code failed, but that someone else can do his dirty work. Survival arrives as a gift, not a consequence of careful control. The focus is not just on Leela's obsession, it's on how Dexter internalizes the idea that his darkness inspires devotion, that people will rearrange reality to protect it. Miguel takes that further. He doesn't just admire Dexter, he wants in. He learns the code, then immediately weaponizes it to kill Ellen Wolf. Power, not principle. Dexter's quiet fantasy of a disciplined apprentice collapses into the nightmare of a political killing machine. Yet the lesson he carries forward is subtle, the code is flexible. It can be taught, bent, faked. If Miguel can misapply it for power, why can't Dexter stretch it for convenience? Jordan Chase completes the triangle with control itself. His whole operation is about manipulation, consent twisted into coercion. Dexter infiltrates that world under the illusion he's still a corrective force. But every time he uses Jordan's language, every time he plays the charismatic predator to get closer, he's rehearsing the same tactics. By the time Trinity, Isaac, and Saxon arrive, Dexter's definition of a necessary kill has already widened. Trinity forces him into the most personal, impulsive failure, chasing Arthur as a project instead of eliminating him, until Rita ends up in that bathtub. Isaac drags love into the equation, pushing Dexter to kill out of emotional loyalty rather than investigative certainty. Saxon turns survival into spectacle, filming kills, baiting Dexter into public, sloppy moves. Each encounter loosens another bolt in the code. Family members, corrupt cops, rivals, anyone who threatens his fragile order can now qualify. So by the later seasons, is Dexter really stopping monsters or curating their techniques? Along the way, he learns Brian's identity politics, Leela's emotional leverage, Miguel's moral flexibility, Jordan's manipulation, Trinity's double life. He doesn't end the chain, he becomes its composite. And in the next section, we'll see what happens when that composite finally runs out of targets and turns back on itself. Dexter doesn't flatline on a kill table or bleed out in an alley. He ends up in a fluorescent hospital corridor, watching the last person who ever really believed in him slip away because of a plan he thought he controlled. That's the final pattern repeating, not breaking. Let's kick things off with the chain reaction. Saxon, the brain surgeon, shoots Deb in what feels like another survivable near miss. She's talking, joking, conscious. We've seen Dexter walk loved ones out of worse. But a clot, a stroke, and suddenly the investigation turns inward. Dexter Morgan, the cop who spent seasons cleaning up Dexter's failures, is declared brain dead because he couldn't leave a threat alone. From a bullet in a parking lot to a ventilator in a dim ICU room, the trajectory is brutally clear. To keep this clear, we watch Dexter do what he's always done, improvise a solution. He unplugs Deb, wheels her body past oblivious staff, and slides her into the hurricane dark ocean like one more bloodslide. Then he steers his boat straight into the storm, fakes his death, and reappears as the most infamous meme in this show's history, Lumberjack in Exile. On paper, it looks like survival. In practice, it's the most complete collapse of his life he's ever engineered. Because this is just Brian, Leela, Miguel, Trinity, and Saxon all over again, without any buffers left. Brian cost him the fantasy of a brother. Leela burned down his support system and killed Dokes. Miguel corrupted the code and nearly turned it into a political weapon. Trinity walked right past Dexter's suburban camouflage and murdered Rita. Each time, Dexter survived, and someone he loved paid the price. Deb's death is that pattern with the training wheels ripped off. There are no kids to raise, no sister to forgive him, no workplace to hide inside. The double life is over, because there's no life left to double. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this idea. The lumberjack exile isn't a twist. It's a slow-motion inevitability. Each major section will show how every villain stripped away a layer of Dexter's constructed world. The job, the family, the code, the illusion of control. By the time he's stacking logs in silence, all that remains is the bare minimum. A man alone with his monster, no story left to tell himself about why it exists. So is that really an escape? Or is it the ultimate, almost loss, where the central question isn't whether Dexter dies or gets caught, but whether anything about his existence still matters? He doesn't end up dead on a table. He doesn't end up in handcuffs. He ends up in something worse for a character who finally learned to feel. A life where every meaningful connection, every purpose, every self-justifying narrative has been amputated. The villains didn't kill him. They did something crueler. They left him with nothing worth protecting. And in the next section, we'll see how New Blood tests whether that empty survival can hold or whether the cycle demands one last collapse. That empty survival sets up the real question the show keeps circling, without ever quite naming. What actually happens to evil when it loses? Does it disappear, or does it just change shape? In this video, we're going to treat every near defeat, every almost fatal encounter, as data in a longer investigation into how darkness adapts inside Dexter's world. Because the central question isn't, is Dexter good or bad? The show answers that in Blood by season 1. The deeper question is, how does evil learn? Brian dismembers dolls and bodies to recreate Dexter's origin, not just to taunt him, but to offer a new plan for what that origin could mean. He proves that trauma can be weaponized in two directions. Harry turns it into a code. Brian turns it into permission. Dexter chooses the code, but the possibility of choosing Brian never goes away. To keep this clear, we can think of each major villain as a different mirror Dexter keeps trying not to look into. Brian shows that origin doesn't excuse monstrosity. Being made in blood doesn't absolve what you choose to do with it. Leela shows how passion can justify anything. She burns apartments, kills Dokes, nearly murders Rita and the kids, all in the name of love and authenticity. Miguel takes righteousness and corrodes it from the inside, bending Harry's rules into a political hit list. Trinity wraps horror in church services and family breakfasts, proving that normalcy is just another mask. Saxon arrives last to demonstrate that legacy itself can be poisoned, that the story of a monster can spawn sequels. Every time Dexter almost loses to one of them, the psychology of the show shifts. When Brian has Deb strapped to that table, we're not just afraid Dexter will die. We're afraid he'll say yes. When Leela frames Dokes and walks away from that cabin explosion, we see how easily the code can outsource its consequences to someone even less stable. When Trinity gets to Rita first, the entire fantasy of control collapses in a bathtub. And that's where our own complicity comes in. Dexter's repeated brushes with death force us to interrogate our appetite for vigilante justice. What would actually happen if the Bay Harbor butcher died in a shipping container or bled out on Saxon's knife? Do we fear the loss of life or the vacuum of order? The focus is not just on whether Dexter survives, but on the chaos that would follow if our necessary monster suddenly vanished and the system had to face what it quietly relied on. Along the way, the line between hunter and hunted keeps blurring. These villains stalk, improvise, and rationalize in almost the exact ways Dexter does. The difference is rarely in the ritual, it's in the narration. We ride inside Dexter's head, so his kill rooms feel like control and theirs feel like collapse. That's the final, unsettling implication. In a world built on secrets and rationalizations, the gap between Dexter and his enemies isn't what they do. It's who gets to tell the story. And in the next section, we'll see how new blood rips that narrative control away from him, and what happens when someone else finally writes the ending. New blood rips that narrative control away, but it's only the final movement in a pattern that's been playing since the very beginning. From Brian to Saxon, every major villain doesn't just threaten Dexter's life. They dismantle his illusions, expose his weaknesses, and leave permanent scars on his world that no new identity can erase. Brian isn't just the ice truck killer. He's the living proof that Harry's code didn't save Dexter from what he is, it just redirected it. When Brian lays Deb on that plastic and offers Dexter a choice, the central question isn't, will Dexter survive? It's, will Dexter finally admit who he'd rather kill? Trinity doesn't just outmaneuver him operationally. He walks straight past the suburban fantasy, past the investigation, into that bathroom where Rita's blood turns the origin story into a closed loop. These aren't random close calls. They're structural failures in Dexter's plan to stay in control. Leela burns down his apartment, kills Dokes, and almost murders Rita and the kids. Miguel turns the code into a political weapon, threatening to scale Dexter's private pathology into a public killing machine. Oliver Saxon has Dexter at gunpoint in a hospital, 1 second away from ending the entire trajectory before Batista walks in. Over and over, the focus is not just on whether Dexter makes it out alive, but on how much of his world has to collapse for that survival to happen. Why do we keep watching that cycle? Because we're not tuning in to see a flawless mastermind. We're watching a man who thinks he's a predator discover, again and again, that he's also prey. Each season feels like a prolonged, high-stakes coin flip. Brian or Deb, Dokes or Lila, Trinity or Rita, Harrison's future or Dexter's freedom. How close can he get to total collapse without finally tipping over the edge? And when he does tip, is it fate or just one failed contingency too many? To keep this clear, Dexter is always two things at once: predator and target, careful planner and walking disaster, a forensic analyst who understands blood spatter, and a denial machine who refuses to read his own. That paradox is the psychology engine of the show. Along the way, every villain functions like a stress test on the story he tells himself about control, forcing him to improvise, to rationalize, to sacrifice one more person to keep the narrative alive. So, where do we go from here? In this video, we're going to keep pulling on those threads. Drop a comment with the villain you think came closest to actually beating Dexter, and why. Was it Brian in the shipping container, Trinity in that bathtub, or Saxon in the hospital hallway? Rewatch those key episodes through this near-lost lens and see how different the stakes feel. And if you want to go further, tell us whether you'd rather see a full breakdown of Deb's moral unraveling or a ranking of Dexter's worst mistakes, season by season, as the next deep dive into how his illusion of control finally, irreversibly, breaks.